Hey, a park ranger on a solo night patrol found a trail register sitting open on a closed trail. The last entry was dated 3 weeks after the trail was locked. The handwriting matched a hiker missing since spring. The trail had been physically gated. The register box had been padlocked. No key was missing from the station. Nobody had signed the log between the last official check and that night. The register was a standard NPS green cover booklet. The ink was still slightly wet when he touched the page. He finished his patrol. He filed the report. He transferred districts the following month and has not worked a backcountry assignment since. But to understand why that page disturbed him more than anything else he saw that night, you have to go back to where these stories start and understand that rangers are not easily scared. That is what makes it worse when one of them is. The first account in this collection was submitted anonymously. The ranger who sent it asked only that his district not be named. He described what happened as something I reported once and was told to log as animal activity. He has been in this work for 8 years. He is not the kind of person who spooks easily, and he said as much in his submission. He mentioned that detail specifically, the way people do when they need you to understand that what they are about to tell you is not the product of an overactive imagination. 8 years in Central Appalachian National Forest land. He knows the difference between a bear pushing through brush and a person moving quietly. He knows what a coyote sounds like versus what wind does to a hollow. He understands the terrain well enough that he drives the service roads on memory without looking at the map, because the potholes have been in the same places for 6 of his 8 years, and the Park Service has not gotten around to fixing them yet. The morning in question started the way most of his mornings start. He filled a thermos at the station before the other staff arrived, checked his radio, pulled the key ring from the hook by the door, and got into the truck. The keys for the chain gates were on a separate ring, heavy, numbered with small metal tags that matched the gate numbers on his paper log. After a washout had closed the lower access road the previous week, his assignment was to drive the upper service road and check each of the closure gates in sequence, verify the padlocks were intact, mark each one clear in the log, note any signs of unauthorized entry. Standard stuff. The kind of work that lets your mind wander if you let it. He marked the first 3 gates clear before 8 in the morning. Padlocks intact, no sign of use, gravel undisturbed. The fog was still sitting in the lower hollows when he reached the 4th gate, the one that closes off the ridge trail above the old slide scar. That trail had been under a closure order for 6 weeks, posted after a geological survey flagged the upper section as an active slide hazard. Nobody was supposed to be on it. He pulled up to the gate, got out of the truck, and reached for the padlock. That is when he saw the shoe. It was sitting on the top rail of the gate. Not on the ground, not caught in the hinge, not wedged in the chain, sitting upright on the top rail, balanced, facing the trail. A child's sneaker. White with a blue stripe, Velcro closure. Sized for a kid maybe 7 or 8 years old. The laces were tucked inside, neat, the way a parent folds them to keep them from dragging. It was not muddy, it was not torn. It looked like it had been placed there on purpose, deliberately, like someone setting something down on a shelf. He stood there for a moment. The fog moved in the hollow below. The padlock was intact. He checked it twice. His first thought was reasonable. Someone had climbed the gate illegally. Hikers do it sometimes when they think a closure is bureaucratic rather than safety-related, and the shoe had come loose in the process and ended up on the rail. Kids lose shoes. It happens. He photographed it, bagged it in an evidence bag from the truck kit, and noted it as found property in his log. He checked the ground on both sides of the gate for footprints and found nothing clear. The soil was soft from the previous night's rain, which made the absence of prints noticeable, but he chalked it up to the gravel surface at the gate apron. He moved on. He radioed found property into dispatch from the truck at the next gate. The dispatcher came back to him inside of 4 minutes. The shoe matched the description of a piece of clothing listed in an open missing child case out of the adjacent county. A 9-year-old boy who had disappeared from a trailhead 11 miles south, 3 months prior. The match was not confirmed. It was a possibility. The sheriff's office would need to make the comparison. The dispatcher asked him to hold the item and stay available. He sat with that for a while. 11 miles south, 3 months ago. The trail behind that gate had been closed for 6 weeks, and the padlock had been intact. He thought about the shoe sitting upright on the rail, balanced, facing the trail. Not caught, not dropped, placed. Then he thought about something else. It had rained the previous night. A steady rain starting around 8 p.m. and running until after midnight. The kind that softens the soil and leaves everything with a wet film in the morning. The shoe was dry, not damp, not slightly wet. Dry, as if it had been brought from indoors and set on that rail sometime in the hours after the rain stopped. He went back. He unlocked the gate and pushed it open and walked 50 yards down the trail, not because procedure required it, but because the shoe being dry would not leave him alone. The trail surface was soft the way it gets after a night of rain, dark with moisture, the kind of soil that holds a print clearly. There were no footprints going in, none. Not a boot, not a shoe, not a bare foot. The ground past the gate was undisturbed in both directions along the trail edge. Except at the base of the first trail marker post, 6 inches from the wooden post and pressed flat into the mud, there was a handprint. A human handprint, adult-sized, palm down, fingers extended and pointing down the closed trail. It was clean and deliberate. Not a stumble, not a brace, a placement. Someone, or something, had put their hand flat on the ground there and pressed down. He photographed it. He did not go deeper. He backed out of the trail, watching the ground, watching the trees, and relocked the gate behind him. The padlock clicked shut. He stood at the truck and looked down the trail, into the section where it curved left and disappeared into the ridge timber. The fog from the hollow had thinned a little. The birds were doing what birds do in the morning. Everything looked like it was supposed to look. Then a whistle came from somewhere down the trail. A sharp, human whistle, the kind you make with 2 fingers in your mouth. Once. Clear. Close enough to place, but not close enough to see the source. He did not answer it. He got in the truck. He drove out. The county sheriff's office examined the shoe. They said it was a possible match to the item from their open case, but not confirmed. The trail camera nearest the gate, the one the district had aimed at the gate apron to catch ATV poachers, was missing its memory card when maintenance checked it 2 weeks later. The card had been in place during the previous maintenance visit, 5 weeks before. A week after the incident, he went back to the trail with another ranger to recheck the area. A second washout had closed the first half-mile of the trail. The handprint was gone, of course, dissolved by subsequent rain. He had not included the whistle in his incident report. He had written it up carefully and stopped thinking about it, which is what he said he does with certain things. The shoe is still logged as found property in a bag. In a case file the county sheriff's office has not officially closed. He does not check closure gates alone anymore. He did not explain that decision to his supervisor. He just started requesting a second person for those runs, and nobody pushed back. The case is still listed as open. He does not know whose shoe it was. He said, at the end of his submission, that he thinks about the handprint sometimes. Not often, but sometimes. Usually in the morning, when he is driving the service road and the fog is still sitting in the hollows. He thinks about the fingers pointing down that trail and the thing that was down there, past the curve, that had just whistled to let him know it heard the gate close. The next account comes from a fire tower in the same mountain range, roughly 60 miles northeast. It was submitted to an outdoor forum that no longer exists, and cross-referenced through a second-hand account from the ranger's former patrol partner. The ranger herself has never spoken about it publicly. Her partner says she requested indoor assignments the following season and has not returned to fire tower duty since. He says when he asked her why, she told him what happened and then asked him not to ask again. He respected that. He submitted the account because he thinks it is the kind of thing other rangers should know. She had done the fire tower assignment twice before without any trouble. That is the detail her patrol partner always leads with when he tells this story, because he says it matters. She was not new to it. She knew what the tower sounded like at night, knew the way the metal frame expanded and contracted with temperature changes, knew the particular moan the observation room door made when the wind came from the southwest. She had spent 2 nights up there the previous spring, and 2 nights the spring before that, and both times she had come back with clean weather logs and nothing unusual to report. The assignment was not glamorous, but she did not mind it. Some people find that kind of solitude useful. The tower itself was old, built in the 1950s on a ridge above a long hollow that ran northeast to southwest between 2 forested slopes. By the time she was assigned to it, it had been decommissioned as a permanent lookout for decades, but kept functional for exactly this kind of deployment: short-term weather monitoring during high fire risk stretches and dry summers. The observation room at the top was small, maybe 10 by 10 feet, with windows on all 4 sides and a metal door that opened onto a catwalk. There was a fold-down cot, a radio, a weatherproof log, and a hook on the wall for hanging gear. No running water, no cell service, no landline. You climbed the stairs with everything you needed, and you stayed until your shift was done. She arrived in the early afternoon of the first day, which gave her time to settle in before the light changed. She made the climb with her pack, food for 2 days, water, her personal radio, a thermos she had filled at the station. She checked the observation radio first, ran a test call to dispatch, confirmed the channel and the signal strength, and logged the time. Then she ate half a sandwich, sitting on the catwalk, and watched the cloud movement to the south, which was what she was there to watch. The humidity was high, and the air had the particular stillness that sometimes comes before a shift in weather. She noted it in the log. She ate the other half of the sandwich. She went inside and watched the sun go down over the ridge. The hollow below the tower went dark before the sky did. It was the kind of dark that collects in low places while the light is still holding on the ridgelines above. She watched it happen, the way she had watched it from up there before, and it was fine. It was exactly what it was supposed to be. She wrote in the log, checked the cloud movement, noted the temperature at 7 p.m. and again at 9 p.m. The wind picked up a little after 9, and the tower frame made its sounds, the low structural groan and the faint high vibration in the railing cables. Old towers make noise. That part was normal. She heard her name at 10 o'clock. Not loud, not frightened, just conversational, the way someone calls up to a second-floor window when they want you to know they are at the door. Her name, called once, from below the tower. She went to the window on the south side and leaned out and called back down into the dark. Nothing. She unclipped her flashlight and aimed it down at the base of the tower. The beam was strong enough to reach the ground, and the ground showed nothing. Tall grass, the base of the tower legs, the start of the service trail going back down the ridge. Empty. She went back to her log, old hollow wind behavior, tired ears after hours of ambient noise. Sound does strange things in terrain like that. The hollow below the tower acted as a kind of funnel, she knew that, and voices from the service road a quarter-mile away could sometimes carry and distort up through it. She had heard odd sounds there before. She wrote it down in her personal notes, not the official log, and she kept working. 40 minutes later, it happened again. Same volume, same cadence. Her name, from below, spoken the way someone speaks when they assume you can hear them. She did not lean out the window this time. She sat still and listened, and that was when she noticed something she had missed the first time. The voice had a quality to it that was familiar in a way she could not immediately identify. Not familiar like a coworker or a friend. Familiar the way a particular turn of phrase is familiar, or the way someone's laugh sounds like someone else's. The rhythm of it, the way it softened the consonants in her name. Her mother did that. Her mother had always done that, the way she said certain sounds, the way her name came out slightly rounder at the end than other people said it. Her mother lived in another state, had not visited in almost a year. She did not call back down. There was something her training supervisor had said when he walked her through fire tower protocol 3 years earlier. She had not thought about it in a long time, but she thought about it now. He had mentioned offhand, the way he mentioned most things that were not strictly in the manual, quietly, without making a production of it, that the hollow below that tower had what he called a long history of strange sound behavior. His exact phrase. He said some rangers who spent the night up there had started answering sounds they should have left alone. He said, if you hear something you recognize after dark, do not call back down. He did not elaborate. She had filed it away as a quirk, the kind of cautionary lore that accumulates around old structures in remote places. She had not taken it seriously enough to wonder what answering would mean. She was taking it seriously now. She ran her radio check with dispatch at 11 p.m., and the signal came through clean. She considered calling her mother. Not because she believed her mother was somehow calling the tower. That was not possible. There was no landline and no cell signal. But because she wanted to hear her mother's voice clearly, in the right context, from the right direction, to replace the version of it that was sitting below her in the dark hollow. But there was no way to make that call from up there. She had known that when she took the assignment. The thermos was still half full, and she drank some of it and watched the ridgeline through the south window and listened to the tower make its normal sounds. At 12:40 in the morning, the voice came a third time, except it was not below the tower anymore. It was on the stairs. She heard it clearly, weight on metal, the specific sound that the step plates make when something presses down on them, a sound she knew from her own 3 trips up and down since arriving. 1 step, then a pause, then another, starting from the bottom. She counted without meaning to, the way you count when you need to understand what you are hearing. 1, pause, 2, pause, 3. It went to 7 and stopped. The tower had 22 steps. She had counted them on the way up. Nothing came further. Nothing went back down. She sat on the cot with her back against the wall and the radio in her hand, and the door latched from the inside, and she listened for a long time. The wind moved through the cables. The tower frame did what it always did. And from the stairs, from that 7th step, nothing. No retreat, no advance. Just the sense of something that had stopped and was waiting with the patience of something that had all night. She did not open the door. She did not call out. She kept the radio in her hand and she waited. At 3 in the morning, she heard the steps again, but this time they were going down. One at a time, slowly, from wherever they had been waiting on that 7th step all the way to the bottom. She listened to each one and counted backward. 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. and then the sound of weight leaving the last step and transferring to ground, and then nothing. The ridge fog came up after that and pressed itself flat against the observation windows, white and close, and she sat with it until the sky started to change. She did not sleep. She did not check the stairs until full daylight. In the morning, the lowest 3 steps had a light film of dew on them, undisturbed. The kind of fine, even moisture that settles on metal overnight when the temperature drops. She photographed them. Clean. But the step plate at the 7th level, the one where the sound had stopped and waited, had a scuff through the dew. A single horizontal mark, the width and shape of a boot sole pressing forward into the step. It could have been old, it could have been from her own ascent. She did not believe either of those things, but she noted them as possibilities because that is what you do. She completed the 2nd night of her assignment without incident. She logged her weather observations, both nights, in full. The incident was not included in the official weather report. She told her patrol partner about it 2 weeks later, at the station, in a parking lot in the middle of the day, because she did not want to tell it somewhere with poor lighting. He listened to the whole thing and then asked one question. Did it get the voice right? She thought about that for a moment. Almost, she said. The rhythm was right, the way it said her name was right, but something in the pitch was slightly off, like a recording played back at the wrong speed, close enough to recognize and wrong enough to notice. He nodded and did not say anything else. She stopped at a gas station on the way down the mountain the morning she left the tower and called her mother from the payphone near the air pump. Her mother picked up on the 3rd ring, happy to hear from her. She said she had been thinking about her. Her mother said she had not been thinking about anything in particular the night before. She had taken a bath and gone to bed early. She had slept fine. The scuff through the dew on the 7th step is the detail that stayed. Not the voice, not the waiting, not even the sound of something walking down from that step at 3 in the morning. The scuff. Because the scuff was not ambiguous. The scuff was there when the dew was undisturbed on every other step, in exactly the place where the sound had stopped, and it had the shape of something that had stood there for 2 hours and 40 minutes without moving, waiting to be answered. She was not answered. That is probably important. The 3rd account in this collection was submitted by a woman whose father spent nearly 2 decades as a ranger in a southern Appalachian National Forest district. He died 3 years ago. She says he told her this story the year before he died, in his kitchen, while she was visiting for a week, and that he had never told it to anyone else in full. He told her he had never filed a complete report because there was one part he could not explain in a way that would fit in a report. He was not, she says, a superstitious person. He was the most practical man she ever knew. He could tell you the water table under any hollow in his district and what the creek levels would do after a heavy rain and which service roads to avoid after a wet spring. He did not believe in things he could not account for. She says that is why she believed him. He had worked the same district for 19 years when it started, which meant he knew the Creekside Trail the way most people know their own neighborhood. He knew where the water ran high in March and where it dropped in August. He knew which sections of the bank were stable and which ones would slump after a wet week. He knew the sound the trail made in different weather, the way the creek noise bounced off the ridge face in cold air, the way it got absorbed by leaves in summer, the way it moved through the hollow at dusk and made distances hard to judge. 19 years of the same ground. He trusted that knowledge the way you trust something you have tested repeatedly and found reliable. The call that sent him out that evening was a report of a structure fire smell coming from deep in the closed section of the Creekside Trail. The trail had been closed for the better part of a season, posted with standard closure signs, and a chain across the trailhead, following some blowdown that made the upper section impassable, and a slope stability concern that the district geologist had flagged. Nobody should have been in there. The fire smell report had come from a day hiker on the adjacent ridge who said they caught it twice on the wind, both times from the direction of the closed drainage. Could have been anything. Old burn smell moving through terrain. Someone cooking on the ridge above. A campfire outside the closure boundary carrying down. He was not alarmed. He drove the service road to the trailhead at dusk, parked, got out, and checked the chain across the trailhead. The padlock was intact. He opened the register box out of habit. He had checked this register dozens of times, and it was almost always the same. A few entries per month from before the closure, then nothing after the posted date. He lifted the cover and started to thumb through to the last page. The last page was not where the entries stopped. There were 12 entries after the closure date, all in the same handwriting. A neat, slightly forward-leaning print, unhurried, deliberate, all using the same name, T. Harlan. The entries were dated across the past 6 weeks, spaced out the way a regular hiker spaces visits, and each one contained specific observations. Creek level at the lower crossing, a blowdown location with an estimated trunk diameter, a note about a great blue heron observed at the gravel bar, a note about bear sign near the upper switchback. The kind of detail that comes from someone who has been on a trail recently and paid attention. The last entry was dated 2 days prior. He stood there in the dusk and read them twice. He was annoyed more than anything else. Someone knew this trail well enough to use it illegally and write it up like a field log. He bagged the register, noted it, and drove back to the station. He ran the name that night. No permit had ever been issued to a T. Harlan in his district, or in the adjacent districts he had access to. He widened the search to incident logs. There it was, buried in a report from 17 years back, a T. Harlan listed as an unconfirmed missing person on a trail about 4 miles east, on the other side of the ridge. The case had been administratively closed after 2 seasons with no remains found and no further contact. Unconfirmed missing meant exactly that. Someone had reported the person overdue, a search had found nothing, and at some point the case had been filed away under the assumption that the person either turned up elsewhere or was gone in a way the terrain was not going to give back. He looked at the name in the old report and the name in the register. He told his daughter the connection seemed thin enough to dismiss, and he did dismiss it. Common enough name. Coincidence of geography. He was a practical man. He went home and slept without trouble. The next morning, he went back to the trailhead with a colleague. He wanted a second set of eyes on the area, and he told his colleague he was following up on the register anomaly and checking for any sign of unauthorized camping. What he did not say was that the T. Harlan connection was sitting in the back of his head at a low frequency, the way a detail sits when you have dismissed it, but not quite convincingly enough. They found the campfire ring about 30 yards inside the closure boundary, just off the trail on a flat piece of ground beside a large white oak. He had walked past that spot so many times he could have described it from memory, and there had never been a fire ring there before. Not last season, not the season before. The rocks were river stones, the kind you have to carry up from the creek, and they had been stacked with unusual care. Not just piled, but fitted together, the way someone builds something they intend to use more than once. The ash inside was cold, not old cold, the gray, chalky cold of ash that has been through several rain cycles, but recent cold, the kind that still has some darkness in it. In the center of the ring, sitting on top of the cold ash, was a trail register booklet. Standard NPS green cover. identical to the one he had pulled from the register box the previous evening. He crouched down and opened it. One entry, neat, forward-leaning print, his own name written in full, with that morning's date, and a single notation, arrived 8:14 a.m. His colleague checked his watch without being asked. It was 8:21. They had been at the trailhead at 8:14. He said he stood up slowly and looked at his colleague, and his colleague looked at him, and neither of them said anything for a moment. Then his colleague said, practically, that someone had been watching the trailhead, that someone with a view of the parking area could have seen them arrive and written the entry before they reached the campfire. That was the most sensible explanation, and they both knew it. It required a person with a line of sight to the parking area and a reason to do something that strange, but it was possible. People did strange things in the backcountry sometimes. He said he accepted that explanation for about 6 hours. That is where the daughter's account of Chapter 3 ends. What her father told her next is the part he said he could never put in a report. That part, she says, he told her more carefully, slower. The way he told her things when he wanted her to understand exactly what he meant and not add anything to it. He was not a man who embellished. He told it the way he would read a field note into a recorder. Just the facts of it in order, with nothing left out and nothing added. He went back alone that evening. He told his colleague he was doing a routine follow-up check, retrieving the register from the campfire ring for evidence logging and looking for prints around the site. That was true. He did not say the other part, which was that he wanted to go back alone because something about the morning visit had not settled, and he could not identify what it was precisely, only that it had the feeling of something unfinished. 19 years in that district had given him a particular kind of instinct about the land. The way long familiarity with a place creates a baseline you feel in your body before you can name it in words. Something in the baseline had shifted. He wanted to check it without an audience. He parked at the trailhead just after 5 in the evening. The light was still good, but trending. He had maybe 90 minutes before it became difficult, and he planned to be back at the truck in 60. He noted the weather in his personal log out of habit, partly cloudy, cooling fast, southwest wind picking up, creek running higher than the previous morning from a rain system that had moved through midday. He unlocked the chain, went through, locked it again behind him. Cell signal was gone by the time he reached the first bend, which he expected. His radio worked, but the creek hollow gave it poor reception at ground level. He knew this. He had his flashlight, he had his radio. He had 19 years of knowing exactly where he was. The campfire ring was where they had left it. He crouched and photographed the site from 3 angles before touching anything. The ash had been disturbed since the morning, not dramatically, not obviously, but the surface was different, as if something had moved through it or been pressed into it and removed. He noted that. He picked up the green register booklet from the center of the ring, bagged it, wrote the time in his field log. Then he saw the stones. There was a second ring. Not the campfire ring itself, but a circle of smaller stones placed around it, beginning about 8 feet out from the fire rocks and running all the way around, close set, touching each other, smooth creek stones the size of a fist. He had not seen it that morning. He was certain of that. He and his colleague had walked completely around the fire ring, and he would have noticed a circle of placed stones 8 feet out from it. The circle was too precise to miss and too labor-intensive to have been assembled quickly. Whoever had placed those stones had placed them one at a time, fitted them together, and taken their time doing it. The circle was nearly perfect. He measured it later from his photographs, and it was within 2 inches of a true circle at every point. He stood up and looked at it. He thought about something an older ranger had told him, a man who had worked the same district before him and retired the year he started. They had overlapped by a single season, long enough for that older man to walk a few trails with him and offer the kind of advice that does not make it into the training manual. One afternoon on the Creekside Trail, which the older man had worked for 15 years before him, the older man had said something that he had stored away without quite knowing why. He said, "If anything in a closed section starts showing awareness of the schedule, stop going alone." He had asked what he meant by awareness of the schedule. The older man had looked at the creek for a moment and said, "It is not curious, it is patient." He had been alone in this closed section for 45 minutes. Something in there had documented his arrival, timed to the minute. Something had built a stone circle around a campfire ring between 8 in the morning and 5 in the evening, on a trail that was locked and gated and showed no sign of entry. He crouched to photograph the circle from the south side. The creek went silent. Not gradually, not the way water slows when something upstream shifts. Instantaneous, like a switch, like a door closing on a room where music was playing. The creek had been the constant background of the whole hollow since he arrived, and now it was simply gone, and in the silence that replaced it he heard a footstep on the trail behind him. Then another. The specific sound of a boot on wet leaves, deliberate, not hurried. He turned with his flashlight in his hand and put the beam on the trail. The beam reached 60 feet in reasonable clarity before it softened into ambient dark. At the edge of that soft dark, exactly where the light stopped being useful, something was standing. He could not see detail. It was at the precise boundary between where the flashlight worked and where it did not, which later struck him as the detail that bothered him most. Not what it was, but where it was, as if it understood exactly how far 60 feet was and had placed itself accordingly. What he could tell was that it was upright, that it was not moving, that its proportions were wrong for a deer and wrong for a bear, and that it was tall in a way that would have required it to crouch under the canopy at that spot on the trail, and it was not crouching. It was standing at full height under branches that should not have accommodated that. It was watching him. He could not have said how he knew that, but he knew it the way you know when something in a room is oriented toward you, even before you look at it directly. He did not call out. He did not move toward it. He thought about the older ranger's words. It is patient. And he believed them now in a way he had not believed them when they were only words. He took 3 steps backward, slow, toward the trail exit, keeping the flashlight pointed. The figure did not move. He took 3 more steps. Still nothing. He turned and walked out at normal pace, not running. He told his daughter that running had felt like the wrong thing to do in a way he could not fully articulate, only that it would have meant something he did not want to mean. He walked out the same way he had walked in, with the same pace and the same posture, listening to his own boots on the trail, listening for a sound behind him that did not come. The creek came back at normal volume the instant he stepped through the gate onto the trailhead gravel. Not gradually, all at once, the way it had stopped. He stood at his truck for a moment with his hand on the door handle and listened to it running normally in the dark hollow behind the gate, and then he got in and drove out. He called his colleague from the service road when the radio signal came back. He said the retrieval was done and the site had some additional evidence worth logging. He did not describe the circle. He did not describe the figure. He drove back to the station and wrote up what he could write up. His colleague went back with him the following morning. The small stones were gone. Not scattered, not disturbed in the way a person or an animal scatters things, just gone, as if they had been collected and removed with the same care used to place them. The campfire ash had been stirred through completely. The second register booklet was missing. He filed a report noting unauthorized camping and possible vandalism. The case was referred to the district law enforcement liaison, who found no suspect and no further evidence. The trail remained closed. The T. Harlan connection was noted in an internal memo and then quietly dropped because the original missing person case was administratively dead and there was nothing to connect them with certainty. The fire smell that had sent him out there in the first place was never explained and never recurred. He retired the following spring, a few months earlier than he had originally planned. He told his daughter in that kitchen during that visit that he did not believe in most of what people told campfire stories about. He had spent too many years in the backcountry to believe that the woods were full of things waiting to harm people. He believed in bears, weather, terrain, and human error. He believed the backcountry was dangerous in ways that were mostly predictable if you paid attention. But he believed the Creekside Trail had been used for a long time by something that did not want company and had learned over time how to make that clear without ever doing anything you could put in a report. His daughter says the photograph of the stone circle is still on the district's archival hard drive, in a folder marked with the trail closure code and the notation unauthorized camping, no suspect identified. She found it when she was going through his personal files after he died. He had a copy saved separately, printed on regular paper, and kept in a manila folder with no label. She says she has looked at it many times. The circle is nearly perfect. Not approximately circular, not close, nearly perfect. The kind of precision that implies either a great deal of care or something she does not have a category for. That bothers her more than anything else about the story. Not the figure at the edge of the light, not the creek going silent, the circle. Because her father was an engineer's son who understood geometry, and he told her that circle was closer to true than anything a person working by eye in fading light with river stones could reasonably produce. She does not go into the backcountry alone. She never did before, particularly, but now it is a rule she keeps without having to remind herself. The next account shifts from physical evidence to something harder to document. It was submitted anonymously by a search and rescue coordinator who has worked joint operations with Park Service for more than 15 years. She submitted it with a single line of context. I don't know what to call what happened. I just know what I heard. The search had been running for 4 days when it happened, which meant everyone involved was tired in the specific way that comes from sustained outdoor work in deteriorating weather. Not the tired that sleep fixes easily, but the kind that settles into your joints and makes small decisions harder than they should be. A solo female hiker had failed to check in with her emergency contact after a planned 3-day loop in a backcountry district of a national forest in the southern range. Her car was at the trailhead. Her permit was on file. Her route was documented. She was experienced, according to her family, which meant something and also meant the search area was larger than it would have been for someone less experienced, because capable hikers in trouble tend to keep moving. The SAR coordinator had been managing the grid from the field for 3 of those 4 days, which was not always how she worked, but the terrain in this particular district was complex enough that she preferred to be on the ground. The primary drainage, a long hollow that ran down from a ridge saddle and narrowed as it descended, with steep wooded slopes on both sides and a creek running through the bottom, had been worked 3 times by 2 different dog teams. Both teams had come up empty. No scent article alerts, no direction of travel indicated. The dogs had moved through the drainage efficiently and come out the other end with nothing to show for it, which was discouraging but not conclusive. Terrain like that can hold scent strangely, compress it, redirect it, and a drainage that twists through limestone can do things with airflow that defeat experienced handlers. By the late afternoon of day 4, weather was moving in. Rain was already falling lightly, and the forecast called for it to increase through the evening. The search commander had made the call to suspend ground operations at dark and reassess in the morning. The coordinator was walking the boundary of the search grid to confirm it was properly flagged before the teams pulled out. A practical task, methodical, the kind of work that keeps your hands busy while your mind runs through what you might have missed. Her rain gear hood was up. Her headlamp was on its low setting. Her boots were wet from 2 creek crossings earlier in the afternoon, and her GPS unit was in her left hand, marking waypoints at the boundary flags. She heard the voice at 7:42 p.m. She knows the time because she logged it immediately, which is the kind of habit that takes years to build and that she was grateful for afterward. It came from down the drainage, from below her position on the slope, weak but clear through the rain noise. 2 words: help me. Not screamed, not a distress signal in any formal sense, just the phrase spoken at moderate volume in a female voice, the way someone says it when they are exhausted and have been saying it for a while and are not sure anyone is close enough to hear but are trying anyway. She stopped walking immediately. She keyed her radio. The family had been interviewed extensively on day 1, as families always are, because the details families provide about missing persons often contain information that becomes useful later in ways nobody anticipates. One detail the hiker's sister had mentioned, when asked to describe how her sister communicated when she was in trouble or needed help, was that she always said, "Help me," rather than "help." Not help, not over here, always the complete phrase, quietly, as if asking a favor. The family had found it endearing. The coordinator had noted it in the intake summary and moved on. It was the kind of detail that seemed marginal at the time. It did not seem marginal now. She called it in and requested the dog teams turn back toward the drainage. She gave her position and the direction of the sound, and asked dispatch to confirm no other personnel were operating below her on the slope. Dispatch confirmed. She stood on the slope in the rain and waited for the teams to reposition. The dogs came back in within 8 minutes. They moved into the drainage below her position and worked the area. They showed no alert. They were not confused or uncertain. Experienced search dogs under alert look a specific way, and under no alert they look a specific way, and these dogs were showing no alert clearly. They sat. They looked at their handlers. They did not look at the drainage. That was the first thing that did not fit. The volunteer who had helped establish the search grid that morning had said something at the 7 a.m. briefing that she had half absorbed while managing 3 other things simultaneously. He was an older man, a Trail Association volunteer who had worked this particular district for a long time, and he had the habit of stating practical things plainly without contextualizing them, the way people do when they assume the information is already understood. He had said, "In this hollow, don't follow a voice downhill after dark. If it sounds like who you're looking for, radio first. Go second." She had processed it as a note about acoustic behavior in the terrain, the way voices carry in drainages, and can mislead searchers about distance and direction. She had not thought about it again until this moment. She had radioed first. She was glad for that. The voice came again at 7:49 p.m. She logged it. Still from the drainage below, slightly closer than before. Same volume, same quality. This time, it added something. A name. Her own name, the missing hiker's first name, stated clearly, as if the speaker was identifying herself. "Help me," and then the name. People who are lost and frightened do sometimes state their own names when calling for help. It is not common, but it happens, particularly in cases of significant stress or disorientation. The coordinator knew this. She also knew that the specificity of the phrase, the family confirmed "help me," and now the name, was accumulating in a way that felt like more than coincidence and less than explanation. She noted it in her radio log. She did not move down the slope. She waited. The rain was increasing. 2 of her team members had turned back to the staging area because their GPS units were losing accuracy in the hollow. The combination of terrain and weather was creating enough interference that their waypoints were drifting, and operating with unreliable positioning in that kind of drainage after dark was a safety issue, not a judgment call. She understood. She was at the edge of the confirmed search zone now with 1 other ranger, a younger man who had been on the team for 2 years and who was watching the drainage below with the careful expression of someone deciding how to process what they were hearing. They both heard the 3rd call. It came from uphill, behind them, from above their position on the slope, not below it, not from the drainage at all. Same voice, same phrase. "Help me," stated once, clearly, from a direction that neither of them had moved toward and from which no path led down to where the first 2 calls had originated. Not in 4 minutes. Not in that terrain, in that rain, in the dark. She stood still and did her math. 2 calls from below, logged at 7:42 and 7:49. 1 call from above at approximately 7:53. The drainage below and the slope above were separated by the distance they had been standing on for the past 15 minutes. No person could have moved from one position to the other in that time on that ground in those conditions. She knew the terrain. She had been measuring it with her feet for 3 days. She did not move toward the voice. She radioed her position and the new direction, logged the time, and held where she was. The other ranger stood beside her, and neither of them spoke for a moment. The rain came down on the hood of her gear. The dogs were still sitting below them in the drainage, still showing no alert, still facing their handlers with the calm certainty of animals that have found nothing where something was claimed to be. She gave the order to pull out at 8:05 p.m. The search suspended as planned. She walked out with her team on the established route, in a line, with headlamps, the way you walk out when you want to account for everyone. She counted the team at the staging area. Everyone was there. Nobody had been on the upper slope. Nobody had been in the drainage below. The voice had come from both places within 4 minutes. Nobody in the hollow that night had made it. She drove back to the incident command post and sat in her truck for a few minutes before going inside. The rain on the roof was loud and steady. She thought about the trail volunteer's instruction, the one she had half heard at 7 that morning. Don't follow a voice downhill after dark. She had not followed it. She had radioed first. Whatever had been in that hollow had called from below and then from above, and she had not gone toward either, and she drove home that night wondering whether that had been the right choice or whether there was any version of that evening where it would not have mattered either way. She did not sleep well. She was back at the incident command post before 6 the next morning, which was already unusual light for that time of year. The missing hiker was found at 9:17 a.m. on day 5. She was alive. That part mattered, and the coordinator said later that it was the thing she held on to when she went back over the events of the previous evening. Because whatever else was true about that night, the hiker was alive, and that was the outcome the search existed to produce. She was found by a different team, working a sector on the far side of the ridge from the drainage, 1 valley over from where the voice had been heard. She was in a shallow depression at the base of a rock outcrop, tucked in with her emergency bivvy pulled over her, hypothermic but breathing. The team medics reached her within 20 minutes of the find, and she was responsive to voice by the time they got her packaged for transport. The coordinator was not part of the recovery team. She heard it over the radio from the incident command post, and she noted the location on the map and did not say what she was thinking, which was that the location was on the wrong side of the ridge entirely. The drainage where the voice had come from was on the east-facing slope. The hiker was found on the west-facing slope, in a different drainage, separated from the search area of the previous night by a ridge that a person in her condition could not have crossed. Not in the dark, not in the rain, not in the state she was in when they found her. The medical team's assessment, relayed through the district briefing 3 days later, was that the hiker had been unresponsive for an estimated 36 hours before her recovery. Hypothermia complicated by dehydration, compounded by a fall on day 2 that had left her with a sprained ankle severe enough to make sustained walking impossible. She had no memory of anything after the afternoon of day 2. She had not known her own name when the recovery team first reached her. A common effect of advanced hypothermia, the coordinator knew, but still a thing that landed oddly given what she had heard the night before. The voice in the drainage had said the hiker's name clearly, correctly, without hesitation. The hiker herself, during her recovery, was asked whether she had called out for help during the search period. She said she did not remember doing so and did not believe she had. She had been semi-conscious for most of the time, she said, drifting. She did not remember the drainage. She did not remember the east-facing slope. She had been where she was found from approximately the end of day 2, as far as anyone could reconstruct. The coordinator wrote up the incident. She was careful with the language, the way you are careful when you know the document may be reviewed by people who were not there. She noted the voice reports at 7:42 and 7:49 p.m., direction from below in the primary drainage. She noted the third report at approximately 7:53, direction from above on the slope. She noted that dispatch had confirmed no personnel in those locations at the times in question. She wrote possible audio artifact, cause undetermined, which was the most accurate description she could produce that would also survive a review. She noted the dog team's lack of alert response. The trail volunteer was at the incident command post when she filed the report. He had come by to return some flagging tape and sign out of the volunteer log the ordinary end of search paperwork. She handed him a copy of her incident summary, partly out of courtesy and partly because he had worked that drainage longer than anyone else connected to the search, and she wanted his read on the audio artifact notation. He read it, standing at the table, slowly, moving through each paragraph. When he finished, he set it down and nodded once. "You did right not going down there," he said. She asked him what he meant, specifically. He looked at the drainage section of her summary again, and then looked at the topo map on the table beside it. He was quiet for a moment in the way that people are quiet when they are deciding how much to say. "That hollow pulls," he said finally. "Always has. Something in it doesn't like the search pattern, doesn't like the dogs." He paused. "It's called down 2 other searchers in the years I've worked this district. Neither of them went in as far as whatever wanted them to. Both of them are fine." He picked up his copy of the flagging tape receipt and signed it. "Voice going uphill on you at the end was new. That part I hadn't heard before." He left after that. She did not put any part of that conversation in the official report. She thought about what he had said for a long time afterward. The voice going uphill. The third call, from behind them, from above, from the direction opposite the drainage. She had been thinking of it as the voice moving, as if something had repositioned itself between 7:49 and 7:53. But there was another way to read it, one that she had not considered until the volunteer said what he said. The drainage pulls. The voice had called from below twice, drawing attention down the slope. The third call, from above, had been in the same voice, the same phrase. But by the time the third call came, she and the other ranger had not moved toward the drainage. They had stayed put. They had radioed first. She was not certain, and she said she was not certain, but she found herself wondering whether the third call, the one from uphill, from behind them, from the direction that would have required turning away from the drainage, had been redirecting them. Not luring, redirecting. Away from the slope. Away from the hollow that pulls. Away from whatever was at the bottom of it, in the place where the dogs sat down and faced their handlers and refused to look. She knew that was not a conclusion she could support with anything in the incident report. She knew it was the kind of interpretation that gets generated by tired people under stress looking for a frame that makes experience feel intentional. She acknowledged all of that. She still found herself returning to it in the months afterward, when she thought about the hiker alive in her bivvy on the wrong side of the ridge, unconscious, not calling out, not capable of calling out, while something in the drainage on the other side said her name in her voice from 2 directions in 11 minutes. The radio log confirmed her call-ins at 7:42 and 7:49. The team GPS logs confirmed no personnel in the drainage or on the upper slope at either time. The dog handler's written notes from that evening included a single line under behavioral observations: avoidance response, cause unknown. The handler had not elaborated. The coordinator called her afterward and asked about it. The handler said the dogs had not been frightened. They had not shown stress or anxiety. They had simply declined to work the area, in the specific way that experienced search dogs decline when there is nothing there for them to find. She said it in a matter-of-fact way, the way people describe things they have a professional relationship with and do not need to dramatize. Nothing there for them to find, in the place where the voice had been. The hiker recovered fully over the course of several weeks. She went home to her family. She did not return to backcountry hiking, at least not in the year following the search, according to the coordinator's understanding through the family liaison. The search was officially closed with the notation, "Successful recovery, subject located alive." The trail volunteer's observation was not included in any document. The coordinator checked with him once, a few months later, when she ran into him at the district office. She asked if he had ever gone into that drainage himself after dark to see what was pulling. He looked at her with the expression of someone who has been asked a question they consider slightly beside the point. "I've worked this district for 30 years, he said. "I know what the dogs know." She understood that to mean no. The dog teams that have worked that drainage since have continued to show the same avoidance response in the lower section, according to the handler the coordinator has stayed in contact with. Not every time. Not consistently enough to document as a pattern, but enough that the handler routes her teams around the lower section when she can, and takes the long way around the ridge when the assignment allows it. She has not filed anything about it. Neither has the coordinator. The coordinator's rule now, on any drainage search after dark, is 3 personnel minimum. She does not explain the rule to new team members beyond saying it is good practice for terrain management. She does not tell them about the voice. She does not tell them what the volunteer said. She follows voices toward water, she says, not away from it. That is how you find people. But in that hollow, on that slope, in the rain, she had let the radio be the thing that went first, and the voice had moved to a place that would have turned her away from the drainage, and the hiker had been on the other side of the ridge the entire time, alive, in a place the voice had never pointed toward. She says the thing that stayed with her was not the volunteer's face when she told him what happened. It was that he did not look surprised. Not even a little. 30 years in that district, and a voice calling from 2 directions in 11 minutes did not move his expression at all. That, she says, is the part she cannot put down. Not what was in the hollow. What the volunteer already knew was in the hollow, and how long he had known it, and how many other things he knew about that terrain that he had never put in a report either. The dogs have never worked the lower section of that drainage without showing avoidance behavior. The trail volunteer retired the following year. The coordinator does not know who replaced him or whether that person knows about the hollow. She hopes someone told them. She does not know if anyone did. The next account is shorter than the others. It was told by a county deputy, not a ranger, though it came out of a Park Service incident and the ranger involved has since corroborated the basic facts. The deputy described it as not the kind of thing I expected to see in this job, and I've seen a lot. He said that not as preamble, but as a plain statement, the way someone says it when they need you to understand the weight of what comes after. He has worked rural law enforcement for over 20 years. He carries a tent now when he goes hunting. He used to use lean-to shelters. The call came in on a Tuesday afternoon in early October, which was otherwise an unremarkable day. A hiker had come out of the backcountry on the forest trail that ran northeast through a long ridge section and terminated at a small gravel parking area off a county road. He had come out 6 miles in the dark, which is a significant thing to do on an unfamiliar trail without planning for it. And when he reached the parking area, he sat in his car for 20 minutes before driving to the nearest gas station and calling the sheriff's office from the payphone outside. The dispatcher who took the call said he was calm but specific. He said there was something wrong with the shelter at mile marker 9, and he was not going to explain it over the phone, and he was not going back. He would wait at the gas station. The deputy drove out to meet him. The man was in his mid-40s, a weekend hiker from out of the county. Nothing unusual about him except that he had left his gear at the shelter. All of it. His tent, his sleeping bag, his food bag, his stove. He had walked out in the clothes he was wearing with his car keys and his headlamp and nothing else. The deputy asked why he had left his gear, and the man said he had not wanted to stay in the shelter long enough to pack it, and he had not wanted to carry it through the dark because he had needed both hands free. The deputy asked what he had needed his hands free for, and the man said he did not know exactly. It had just seemed important at the time. He would not describe what he had seen in the shelter beyond, saying that the register was wrong, and that the deputy should look at it himself. The deputy called the Park Service, and a ranger met him at the trailhead within the hour. They hiked in together with headlamps, the trail clear and dry, the night cool and still, the kind of October night that feels clean and manageable when you are walking a known trail with a light. The deputy had been on backcountry calls before. He was not apprehensive. He was curious, which he said is the professional version of the same thing. The shelter was a standard 3-sided Appalachian lean-to, the kind built from pressure-treated lumber with a corrugated tin roof and a wide sleeping platform raised off the ground. There were dozens like it throughout the district, maintained by the Trail Association, each one with a register box mounted to the front post. The deputy had seen the inside of a few of them over the years, and they all looked roughly the same. Platform, roof, the smell of old wood and damp and whatever the last occupants had cooked. This one looked the same on the outside. The hiker's gear was stacked neatly at the far end of the platform, undisturbed. The ranger lifted the register box lid and took out the booklet. The deputy said he watched the ranger's face change as he turned the first page. Not dramatically. Rangers do not tend toward dramatic expressions. But something in it went careful and still, the way a face goes when the brain is working harder than usual to process what the eyes are sending it. He handed the booklet to the deputy without saying anything. Every page was filled. Front to back, margin to margin, both sides, every available surface of every page. The same 4 words, written over and over in what appeared at first glance to be the same hand. Don't go any further. Don't go any further. Don't go any further. Hundreds of times, possibly more than 1,000 times if you counted every instance across every page. The deputy stood under the overhang of the tin roof with his headlamp on the booklet and turned pages slowly, and it took him a minute to notice what he had missed on the first pass. The handwriting was not the same throughout. It was close. Close enough that the first reading felt uniform. But page by page, if you looked carefully, it shifted. Some entries were printed in careful block letters, precise and even, the kind of printing a person does when they want to be legible. Some were in a looser, faster hand, slightly right-leaning, the way adults write when they are moving quickly. Some pages had entries in what looked like a child's deliberate printing, the letters large and carefully formed, the way children print when they are still thinking about each letter individually. Some entries were in cursive, old-fashioned cursive with looping letters that suggested someone who had learned to write in a specific era. Some were cramped and small, some large and sprawling. Some pressed so hard into the paper that the words were embossed on the reverse side of the page. The booklet was 6 months old. The manufacturing date was stamped on the back cover, the way Trail Association booklets always were for inventory purposes. 6 months old, and it was full. The deputy showed the ranger the handwriting variation. The ranger looked through the booklet again, more slowly this time. Then he said the thing that had been sitting at the edge of the deputy's mind since the second page, the thing neither of them had wanted to say first. That is not one person. They stood in the shelter for a while after that. The tin roof made its small sounds in the slight breeze, the random ticking and pinging of metal responding to temperature. The woods outside the shelter were quiet in the way October woods are quiet after dark. No insects, reduced bird activity, the occasional distant sound of something moving through dry leaves and then stopping. It should have felt like ordinary stillness. The deputy said it did not feel like ordinary stillness. It felt like the shelter was at the center of something he did not have a category for, and the booklet in his hands was the evidence of it. And whatever category it belonged to was going to require a different kind of thinking than the kind he had been trained in. He looked at the booklet again. He started at the front and turned pages slowly, and that was when he noticed the pattern. The handwriting did not shift randomly, it progressed. The oldest-looking styles, the formal cursive, the careful old-fashioned print, were concentrated at the front of the booklet. The newer-looking styles, the faster, looser hands, the ones that looked more contemporary in their letter forms, were toward the back. The progression was not perfectly linear, but the general direction was clear. Front to back, older to newer, as if the entries had been made by different people across a significant span of time, each one adding their warning to what the previous ones had left. But the booklet was 6 months old. The paper was not old. The ink was not faded on the early pages. Whatever had been written in those older-looking hands had been written in the same 6-month window as everything else. The ranger checked the manufacturing stamp again, confirmed it. 6 months. They did not go further up the trail. The deputy said that felt like a decision they arrived at without discussing it, the way two people sometimes make the same choice simultaneously without needing to confirm it aloud. The hiker's gear was still on the platform. They left it. The deputy photographed the booklet page by page with his phone, standing under the tin roof with the woods quiet outside and the beam of the ranger's headlamp supplementing his flash. They bagged the booklet as evidence, placed a new register booklet in the box, secured the lid, and walked out. The deputy submitted his photographs to a forensic document examiner he had a working relationship with through his office, informally, without opening a case. He asked for a preliminary assessment of the handwriting variation. The examiner came back to him 2 weeks later. She said the variation was not consistent with a single individual attempting to produce multiple styles. The characteristics she identified across the entries, pen pressure patterns, letter formation habits, spacing tendencies, were the kinds of variation that develop from distinct individuals' motor learning, not from a single person's attempts at imitation. She counted 31 distinct hands. She emphasized that this was a preliminary and informal assessment, not a formal finding, and that she would need original documents and proper chain of custody to stand behind it professionally. 31 distinct hands. In a booklet 6 months old, writing the same 4 words. The ranger asked the Trail Association about the shelter's history when he submitted his incident report. The volunteer coordinator for the district was a woman who had been with the association for a long time, longer than anyone else currently active. She told him the shelter had been built in the early 1980s on the site of a previous structure, an older lean-to that had burned in the 1940s. She did not volunteer any further information. He asked what had burned the older structure. She looked at a point slightly past his shoulder for a moment before answering. "Nobody ever found out," she said, "and they didn't rebuild in the same spot by accident." He asked what she meant by that. She said the location had been chosen deliberately by the people who built the current shelter, because of something about the site that the association's founders had believed made the location important to maintain. She did not say what that something was. She said it the way people say things when they are giving you the edge of information and trusting you to understand that the middle of it is not something they are going to hand over. He did not push. He had the feeling that pushing would not have gotten him anywhere useful, and that she had told him what she considered the relevant part. The booklet was logged as vandalism. A new one was placed. The hiker's gear was retrieved by a volunteer team the following weekend and held at the district office for 30 days before being donated, unclaimed, to a local outfitter's gear exchange. The hiker had not come back for it. He had not followed up with the sheriff's office either. He had driven away from the gas station that Tuesday evening, and as far as the deputy knew, had not been heard from since. 3 months after the incident, the ranger hiked back to the shelter to do a routine maintenance check. The new booklet had been in the register box since the day after the incident. He opened the box and looked inside. One entry, first page, first line, the same 4 words. "Don't go any further." Written in a hand that matched none of the 31 identified in the previous booklet. He closed the box. He completed his maintenance check. He hiked out. The deputy carries a tent now. He said it simply, without elaboration, the way people state a practical change they have made and do not feel the need to justify. Lean-to shelters are common in that range, and he had used them on hunting trips for years without thinking much about them. He does not use them anymore. A tent has walls on all 4 sides, he said, and a zipper he controls from the inside. Nobody went further up that trail, not the deputy, not the ranger, not the hiker who walked out in the dark with his hands free. The ranger said, when the deputy asked him directly, that he had considered it, that there was a professional argument for documenting whatever was beyond that shelter, for understanding what the warning was warning against. He had thought about it for several days after the incident. He had not gone. He said he thought about the volunteer coordinator's phrasing. The location had been chosen deliberately, not despite whatever was there, because of it. Because someone, a long time ago, had decided the right response to whatever was past that point on the trail was not to block the path, but to put a shelter at the boundary and hope that the people who reached it would read what was written and understand. For most of 6 months, nobody had been there to read it. Then, someone had found the booklet full and walked 6 miles out in the dark rather than stay. The warning had worked. It just had not been in a language anyone had expected. The account that follows takes a different shape. It came through an active ranger who asked that her submission be left out of formal channels. She described it as something she had told her supervisor and been advised to leave out of reports. She submitted it, she said, because she thought other rangers should know. It begins not with what she found in the backcountry, but with what she did not find, which turned out to be the more disturbing part. The missing person report came in on a Thursday, which meant the ranger had 2 days of normal shift behind her and was not yet into the tired end of the week. That matters because she was sharp when she found the camp, and she is certain of what she observed. She wants that noted. She said it in her submission the way people say things they expect to be questioned on later. The missing man was 54 years old, experienced, the kind of hiker who kept his own trail logs and cross-referenced them with USGS topographic maps rather than relying on the district's printed guides. His family had reported him overdue after he failed to make his scheduled check-in call from a payphone at a small store near the eastern trailhead, a call he had made punctually on every previous trip. He had been hiking this district for 11 years, the same general area each time, variations on the same loop. He knew the land. That was part of what made his silence unusual. She started at the trailhead at first light on Friday morning, which gave her the full day and the clearest conditions for reading sign. The air was cold, below freezing overnight, and the ground held a light frost that was already softening at the edges where the sun reached it. She pulled on her pack, heavier than a day pack, stocked for an overnight if the search ran long, and started up the trail. She checked the register at the trailhead. His name was there, his entry date, his planned route, his expected return. Everything in order. She photographed it and moved. She worked methodically the way she had been trained, photographing trail signs at regular intervals, checking shelter registers along the route for his name, noting the condition of the trail surface for footwear impressions, estimating pace and timeline based on the entry date and the known distances. She found his name in the first shelter register, correctly dated, a brief note about weather conditions he had observed. She found evidence of a campsite at a known informal camping area on the second day of his planned route, a fire ring with ash that matched the timeline, a compression in the leaf duff where a tent had been pitched, the faint chemical smell of water treatment drops near the creek edge. He had been here. He had moved on normally. The trail closure sign was at a junction 3 miles further. The closure was recent. A blowdown event earlier in the season had taken out a significant section of the upper trail, and the district had posted the junction with a standard closure notice and a recommended alternate route. She stopped at the sign and looked at it, and then looked at the trail beyond it, the closed section, and she saw what she had not expected to see. Footprints. Going in. Fresh enough to show clear tread detail in the frost-softened soil. A lug sole pattern she recognized as a common backcountry hiking boot, medium adult size. She crouched and looked at them. They were his size, consistent with the boot described by his family. She called it in, requested backup, and documented the sign. Then she followed the prints past the closure sign, because that was what the situation required. The prints led her 2 miles up the closed trail, through the blowdown section where she had to step carefully around downed timber, across a creek crossing that was running higher than the marked depth gauge suggested it should be, and into a clearing she had not known was there. It was not on any current district map. She checked her map twice, oriented to landmarks, confirmed her position. The clearing was real and the map did not show it, but its character was consistent with an old logging camp clearing, the particular shape of the regrowth at the edges, the way the trees at the perimeter were a different age than the surrounding forest, the slight depression in the center where heavy equipment had once compacted the soil. Old clearings in logged-out Appalachian land have a specific look if you know what you are seeing, and she knew what she was seeing. The camp was there. Tent zipped, rain fly properly staked, guy lines tight. A stuff sack hung from a branch on the bear hang line, correctly positioned. The camp stove sitting on a flat rock beside the tent, the way an experienced camper places it. Stable surface, clear of the tent fabric, oriented so the fuel canister valve was accessible. Everything stowed. Everything in its place. It looked like a camp whose occupant had stepped away for a short time and expected to return shortly. She documented it from outside the tent perimeter before touching anything. Photographed the camp from 8 angles. Noted the condition of the ground around the tent, the guy line stake positions, the bear hang setup. Then she opened the tent. She said she stood there for a moment after she unzipped it. Not because anything was immediately alarming, but because of the quality of the organization inside. Clothes folded into neat stacks by category. Base layers together, mid layers together, rain gear together, arranged along the left wall of the tent. Food items grouped and consolidated into 2 dry bags, sealed, stacked at the foot end. Water filter sitting on top of a clean bandana on top of the food bags, the way you place something when you want to find it quickly. The sleeping bag laid out flat and smooth, the way a bed is made rather than the way a sleeping bag gets left when someone climbs out of it in the morning. In the exact center of the sleeping bag, placed with the kind of precision that implies intention, was the man's headlamp. A specific model, the one his family had identified as part of his kit. It was switched on. The battery was dead. She stood over it and thought about what it meant that a headlamp had been left switched on inside a closed tent. Not left on accidentally, the way a headlamp gets left when someone forgets to click it off before climbing out. Left on deliberately in the center of the sleeping bag, in a tent that had been zipped from the outside. She could not identify a reason for that made sense to her. She stepped back out of the tent and looked at the camp stove. It had been used recently. The fuel smell was still present, a faint chemical sweetness under the cold air smell, and there was a thin residue in the cook pot consistent with recent use. Beside the stove, on the flat rock, was an aluminum camp cup. She touched the outside of it with the back of 2 fingers, the way you test temperature without committing your palm. The water in the cup was slightly warm. Not body temperature, not hot, but above the ambient air temperature, which was below freezing. Water left in a metal cup below. Freezing does not stay warm, it freezes. She looked at the cup for a moment. Then she looked at the tree line at the edge of the clearing, which was dark enough in the morning shadow that she could not see clearly into it. She noted that in her field log. Then she walked back to the trail to find a position where her radio could reach dispatch. She did not include in her call-in the detail about the water temperature. She reported the camp location, the man's gear confirmed, the camp stove evidence of recent use. She requested backup and a search extension into the closed section. She noted the trail register at the closure sign had no entry from the missing man, which was the kind of detail that experienced backcountry hikers on permit systems did not omit. If you know the system well enough to have hiked it for 11 years, you sign the register at every closure sign, because you know it is how people find you if something goes wrong. He had passed the closure sign without signing out. Backup reached her by early afternoon. They documented the camp comprehensively and cleared the surrounding area in a search pattern that produced no sign of the man in any direction. He was not in the clearing, not in the blowdown section, not at the creek crossing. He had been at the camp recently enough for the stove residue to still be present and the water to still be warm, and he was not there. The search extended through the weekend and into the following week without finding him. The teams worked the closed section thoroughly, working outward from the camp in expanding grids and found no sign of travel in any direction from the clearing. No footprints leaving the camp, no broken vegetation consistent with passage through the blowdown. Nothing at the creek crossing beyond the prints she had followed in. He was found on day 11 by a team working a sector she had not expected, on the other side of the ridge. He was alive, but not the same way he had been before. The recovery team found him on the west-facing slope, 2 ridges over from the clearing, sitting against a tree at the edge of a laurel thicket with his hands in his lap and his eyes open. He was responsive to voice, but only barely, answering questions with single words after long delays, the way someone answers when the gap between hearing and processing is wider than it should be. He was hypothermic but ambulatory. He had no visible injuries beyond the kind of general physical deterioration that comes from extended exposure: skin dry, lips cracked, muscle tone reduced. He was wearing the clothes he had been wearing when he left the trailhead, which the family confirmed from his entry-day photograph. His boots were on his feet. Those were the boots found in the tent. That was the first thing. The family identified them from photographs the recovery team took on scene. Specific model, specific colorway, a repair to the left rand with a particular brand of boot tape that the man had used for years. His family knew the detail because he had mentioned replacing it before the trip. The boots on his feet when he was found matched the boots in the tent in every particular. The boots in the tent were found in the tent. The boots on his feet were on his feet, 2 ridges over. There were not 2 pairs of boots. There was 1 pair of boots, and it was in both places. The ranger was not part of the recovery team. She heard the details through the district briefing held 3 days after he was located. She sat in the back of the room and listened to the summary and wrote in her field notebook and did not ask questions, because the questions she wanted to ask were not the kind that fit in a district briefing. She asked them later, of herself, in the truck on the drive back to the station. The medical team's assessment, as reported through the briefing, noted that the man had no memory of anything after approximately the end of day 3 of his planned route. His last clear memory was of making camp at the informal camping area she had identified earlier in her search, the first camp, the known location, before the closure sign. After that, nothing. 8 days of nothing, ending with sitting against a tree on a west-facing slope, 2 ridges from where his tent was pitched, with no explanation and no awareness of the gap. He did not remember the clearing. He did not remember the camp she had found. He did not remember crossing the closure sign or the creek or the blowdown section. The blister pattern on his feet was inconsistent with the boots. The medical team noted it in passing as part of the general physical assessment, without attaching significance to it. The blisters were on the wrong parts of his feet for the boots he was wearing. The pressure points did not match the boot's construction. Someone who had been walking long distances in a different pair of footwear would show exactly that pattern. No other footwear was found at the camp, on the slope, or anywhere in the search area. The man had no memory of wearing anything other than his boots. She went back to the clearing 2 weeks after the recovery, alone, which in retrospect she acknowledged was probably not the right call. But she went because the camp gear needed to be retrieved per protocol, and she wanted to retrieve it herself. She wanted to see the clearing again without the complication of a search team around her. The clearing was empty. Not empty the way a camp looks after it has been struck and packed out. Empty the way a clearing looks when nothing has ever been there. No compression in the ground where the tent had been staked. No disturbed soil at the guy line anchor points. No fire residue on the flat rock where the stove had sat. The flat rock itself was still there, but clean, with lichen growing on its surface that did not look recently disturbed. The bare hang branch had no marks from a hang line. The clearing looked the way it would look if nobody had camped in it since the logging camp cleared out, however many decades ago that had been. She stood in the center of it for a while. She took out her work camera and photographed the clearing from the same 8 positions she had used when she documented the camp. Then, she went back to the station. When she uploaded the photographs to the district server, she sat at her desk and put the 2 sets of images side by side on her screen. The camp photographs and the empty clearing photographs. Same positions, same angles, same focal length on the same camera. The light was different, different time of day, different season of leaves, but the geometry was identical. Same trees, same sight lines, same flat rock. Different clearing. Not dramatically different, not impossibly different to the eye at first. But the tree arrangement at the eastern edge of the clearing was not the same. 3 trees she had used as reference points in the camp photographs, a cluster of birch at the northeast corner that she had specifically framed her second shot against, were not present in the current photographs. In their place was a dense stand of young maple. The maple was the right size for trees that had been growing there for 15 or 20 years. The birch cluster in the original photographs looked mature, established, not recently grown. The same clearing, the same dimensions, the same flat rock, but the specific arrangement of trees at the edge was different in a way that was not accounted for by seasonal change or the angle of the shots. She sat with that for a long time. She considered her options, which included reporting it formally, reporting it informally, not reporting it, or finding an explanation that made the discrepancy accountable. She looked at both image sets again. The timestamps were correct, the camera metadata was intact, the GPS coordinates embedded in both sets matched the clearing location within 10 meters. The photographs were not altered. They were simply showing 2 versions of the same clearing that did not agree with each other on the arrangement of trees at the eastern edge. She asked an older district employee, a logistics coordinator who had been with the service longer than anyone else at the station, whether the clearing had any documented history. The employee said the logging camp that had used it had burned in the 1950s. A fire of undetermined origin that took out the camp structures and a section of the surrounding timber before it was controlled. She said there had been a period in the years following the fire when the district received occasional reports from hikers and hunters of seeing a camp in that clearing that was not there when anyone went to verify it. The reports had been attributed to light conditions, wishful thinking, the way cleared land plays, tricks on the eye when you come on it suddenly from the timber. The reports had stopped after a while. She did not say when. The ranger's incident report documented the initial camp discovery and the retrieval visit. It did not include the clearing discrepancy. It did not include the water temperature. The photographs from both visits were filed separately under different subfolders in the district image archive, labeled by date, and she did not cross-reference them in any document. The missing man, according to the family liaison update she received 3 months after the recovery, had made a partial return to normal function. He was home. He was not hiking. He had declined to be interviewed further about the incident beyond what he had provided to the search team. His family said he was quieter than he had been. They said he sometimes sat in rooms and looked at nothing for long stretches, and when asked what he was thinking about, said he did not know, only that wherever his mind went in those moments felt warm. Safe, even. He did not understand why, given that the medical team had been clear about the danger his exposure level had represented. He had been close to a threshold he should not have been able to come back from. But he remembered warmth. He remembered vaguely the sense of a fire nearby. Not a specific fire, not a fire he could describe in detail, just the ambient warmth of something burning close enough to matter. Nobody had lit a fire in the search area during the 11 days. The search protocols were clear on open flame prohibition during active searches in that district due to fire risk conditions. Whatever had kept the fire going had not left anything behind when the man was found. The clearing it had kept the fire in was not the same clearing she had documented. The boots that had been in the tent had also been on his feet. 8 days were simply gone from a man who had hiked that district for 11 years and knew it the way you know somewhere you have returned to, repeatedly with care and attention. She checks logging camp coordinates against historical district maps now before entering any clearing that does not appear on current surveys. She does it the way she checks weather and water levels. As a practical precaution, one she cannot fully justify in professional terms, but that she follows without exception. She says she cannot explain why it makes her feel better. She says it does. The 2 photographs are on her personal hard drive. Not the work server, hers. Same clearing, same flat rock, different trees at the eastern edge. She has not submitted them anywhere. She does not know what submitting them would accomplish. Whatever kept that fire going for 8 days in a clearing that does not reliably exist left no evidence that survived the morning. The man it kept warm does not remember it. The ranger who found his camp remembers everything, which she says some days feels like the worst outcome of the 2. The next account was submitted by a man whose father spent 22 years as a ranger in a mountain district of a national forest in the central Appalachian range. His father told him the story repeatedly, from the time he was old enough to follow it until the year the father died. He told it the same way every time. Same details, same sequence, same pauses in the same places. The son says that consistency is what convinced him it was true. People who make things up change the details over time. His father never changed a single detail in 20 years of telling it. The call came in on a Wednesday afternoon in October, which his father always noted because October was when the leaf-wet trails held prints the best and the light dropped fastest. Both of those things mattered before the story was over. The distress report came through dispatch at 2:47 p.m. A person in difficulty on a closed trail in the upper section of the district, reported by another hiker who had heard calls for help before the closed section junction and not gone in. The reporting hiker had not seen anyone. He had heard someone, male voice, calling from inside the closure, and had hiked back out to the trailhead to find cell service and make the call. The trail had been closed since midsummer following a partial collapse of a retaining structure on a steep section above a creek crossing. The closure was safety-based, and the closure signs were clearly posted. The relevant fact, which the ranger's son always emphasizes when he tells this story, is that his father knew that trail better than any trail in the district. He had walked it hundreds of times. He knew every grade change, every route crossing, every place where the drainage ran across the tread after rain. It was not a trail that could surprise him. He believed that going in. It was too close to dark for a full team deployment. Standard protocol for a late afternoon distress call in a closed section was to do an initial assessment solo and call for backup if the situation warranted it. His father had done this many times. He loaded his pack, locked the truck, noted the trail conditions, leaf wet, soft soil, visibility good in the remaining light, checked his radio and set a hard turnaround time of 4:30 p.m., which gave him 90 minutes and guaranteed he would be back at the gate before full dark. He walked in. The trail surface was soft enough to read clearly. That was the first useful thing about October leaf-wet soil. It held impressions the way nothing else in that district did. He could see his own boot prints forming behind him as he walked, the lug sole pressing cleanly into the dark surface, and he could see ahead of him on the trail where someone else had walked before him. Single set of prints, lug sole, medium adult size, going in. Fresh enough that the edges were still sharp, not yet softened by the slow movement of saturated soil. Someone had gone in recently. He followed them. Half a mile in, the prints led him to a trail marker post at a junction with a spur trail, and on the marker post was a jacket. Hung there, not dropped, not caught, hung on the upper arm of the marker the way you hang a jacket on a hook, deliberately. A ranger jacket, his district. He could see the patch from 20 feet away, the specific emblem of his district on the left shoulder, the color and cut of the standard issue jacket he wore to work every day. He stopped and looked at it for a moment before approaching. He checked the size. It matched his. He checked the inside collar for a name tag. Rangers were required to have name tags in their jackets. A plain white tag with their name in black marker, standard protocol. The name tag slot was empty. Not removed recently, not torn out, just absent, as if the jacket had been issued and the name tag never added. He photographed it. He thought through the reasonable explanations. Surplus gear purchased at an outdoor exchange or a donation sale. Someone in distress stripping layers, which people do sometimes in the early stages of hypothermia when they begin to feel paradoxically warm. A jacket found on a previous trip and brought back in. He tagged it as found property in his field log and kept moving. The prints continued past the marker. For about 200 yards they looked the same. Consistent stride length, consistent depth, the same lug pattern. Then they changed. The stride shortened. The depth shifted. The pressure distribution moving forward in the print the way it moves when someone's gait changes significantly, either from injury or fatigue, or a deliberate change in how they are moving. He noted it. Then, approximately 50 yards after the gait change, the prints stopped. Not at a junction, not at a rock or a root where a person might step off the soil surface. In the middle of the trail, in soft leaf-wet soil that should have held any impression, the prints simply ended. The last print was a left foot, partial weight, as if the person had been in mid-stride. There was no right footprint following it. There was no disturbance beside the trail, no broken vegetation indicating a step off into the brush. The prints went in one direction and stopped, as if the person had ceased to exist between one step and the next. He stood over the last print for a while. He crouched and looked at the soil surface around it carefully, the way he had been trained to read ground sign, looking for any impression he might have missed. There was nothing. He looked at the brush on both sides of the trail. Nothing. He straightened up and keyed his radio. The senior ranger at the station answered. He described the print situation briefly, the stopping point, the absence of exit sign. The senior ranger's response was immediate and flat, the tone of someone giving a practical instruction rather than having a conversation. Come out before dark. Don't follow prints that stop in the middle of a trail after 3 p.m. Not on that section. His father asked why. There was a pause, not a long one, but the kind of pause that means the person on the other end is choosing words. Because the one thing that leaves prints like that does not need a path to leave. He started back. The light was dropping the way it drops in October in that terrain, faster than you expect, because the ridge cuts the direct sun before the sky goes fully dark, and the trail was already dimmer than it had been 30 minutes earlier. He walked at a good pace, not running, following his own prints back toward the gate. His prints, the ones he had made walking in, pressed clearly into the wet soil, leading back the way he had come. He had been walking for about 4 minutes when he noticed. His prints were gone. Not all of them. Not at first. He was looking at the trail ahead of him, watching his footing, and he happened to look down at a section of trail he specifically remembered crossing on the way in because there was a route crossing that required a small step up, and he had noted the good impression his left boot had made in the soil beside it. The impression was not there. He stopped and looked at the trail surface around him. The soil was soft and unmarked. He looked behind him and saw his current prints, the ones he was making now, pressing into the soil. He looked ahead toward the gate, toward the direction he had come from. The trail was clean. No prints. His own boot prints, the ones that should have been pressed into that soft soil from his walk in 45 minutes earlier, were simply not there. The only prints on the trail were the ones he was making right now, in this moment, walking out. Except for the prints that stopped in the middle of the trail, those were still there, unchanged, facing in. He walked out at the same pace. He did not run. He told his son, every time he told this story, that not running had been the most deliberate choice of his life up to that point, and he did not fully understand why he made it, except that it had felt like the right thing, and he had learned to trust that instinct in 19 years of backcountry work. He kept his eyes forward. He reached the gate and went through and locked it behind him, and stood at the truck with his hand on the door handle for a moment, breathing the cold air, listening to the trail behind the gate. Quiet. Just the creek in the hollow below, and the last birds of the evening, and the sound of wind in the upper canopy. Nothing on the trail, nothing at the gate. He got in the truck and drove to the station. The senior ranger was waiting. He wrote up the initial report while his father talked. Name of trail, time of entry and exit, found property noted and tagged, print evidence described. His father told him about the prints stopping. He told him about his own prints being gone on the way out. The senior ranger wrote it down without expression, the way experienced people write things down when they are processing them internally and keeping their face out of it. He did not include the erasure of his own prints in the formal report. There was no protocol for it. There was no category in the incident report template for my footprints were removed from the trail while I was walking it. He noted the stopping point of the unidentified prints, the found jacket, the gate change. He left the rest in his field notebook, and the field notebook stayed in his truck. The next morning was when the rest of it came apart. Dispatch pulled the original call log first thing, which was standard procedure for any distress incident that did not result in a located subject. The reporting hiker's call had come through at 2:47 p.m., logged correctly, the hiker's name and contact information recorded. That part was clean. What dispatch noted when they ran the full log was the unit identification number attached to the original distress transmission, not the reporting hiker's call, which had come through a cell phone, but a secondary transmission that had come through on the Ranger frequency at 2:51 p.m., 4 minutes after the initial report. A brief burst of static and a partial voice that dispatch had logged as possible, subject contact attempt, and flagged for follow-up. The unit ID on that secondary transmission was a Ranger radio unit number. Specific, identifiable, the kind of number that is assigned to a physical piece of equipment and tracked in the district's equipment log. The dispatcher had noted it at the time and not thought more about it because unit IDs on Ranger frequencies were expected and unremarkable. It was only when the follow-up pulled the full transmission log that anyone looked at the unit ID carefully. The unit with that number had been decommissioned 23 months prior, logged as damaged beyond repair following a water submersion incident on a creek crossing in the district. The log entry was clear: equipment damaged, decommissioned, removed from active rotation, transferred to surplus storage at the district station. The unit should not have been capable of transmitting. It had been out of service for nearly 2 years. His father sat with the dispatch supervisor and looked at the log entry, and then looked at the equipment record and did not say anything for a moment. The dispatch supervisor said it was probably a logging error, a unit ID transposed in the system, the kind of clerical mistake that happened in radio logs when things got busy. That was possible. It was the most sensible explanation. His father said he agreed and went to check the surplus equipment room. The unit was in its storage box. Correct shelf, correct box, the label on the outside matching the unit number in the decommission log. He lifted the box down and opened it. The unit was inside, in the condition it had been logged in. Housing cracked along the lower left corner from the creek submersion. The antenna connector corroded, the display screen dark. He turned it over in his hands. He looked at the battery compartment. The battery was still in it, which was not unusual for stored equipment. Batteries were sometimes left in units during storage if they had been discharged. He pressed the battery with his thumb. It was warm. Not room temperature, not the ambient temperature of a storage room in an October station building. Warm. The specific warmth of a battery that has been drawing current recently. The heat that comes from chemical activity, from a battery doing what batteries do when something is asking them for power. He set the unit down on the shelf and looked at it. The radio tech came in the following day, called in for an informal look at the unit at his father's request. The tech examined it thoroughly. He said the physical damage was consistent with the original decommission record. The water submersion had done what water does to radio electronics, compromising the board in ways that should have made transmission impossible. He said the battery warmth was consistent with recent use. He said both of those things in the same sentence and then was quiet for a moment. Then he said that he could not formally assess the unit without a proper diagnostic, and that even a proper diagnostic would not necessarily tell him what he wanted to know, and that he was going to write it up as checked and stored with no anomaly noted, because he did not know what else to write. No anomaly noted. The unit went back in its box. The box went back on its shelf. The equipment log was updated with the check date and the notation. Nobody at the station discussed it after that, not directly, not in any meeting or briefing or informal conversation that his father was present for. The senior ranger retired the following spring, which had been his plan for some time, and was not connected to the incident, or at least was not connected to it in any way anyone acknowledged. The jacket was held in the found property locker for 60 days, and then transferred to a donation collection. Nobody claimed it. No missing person was ever identified in connection with the incident. The reporting hiker's contact information was on file, and a follow-up call was made, and the hiker confirmed he had heard a male voice calling from the closed section, and had not seen anyone and had no further information. That was the extent of the follow-up. The case was logged as distress report. Subject not located, no further action required. The boot prints were not in the formal report. His father had considered including them, the stopping point, the gate change, his own prints being gone on the way out, and had decided against it because there was no way to write it that would survive a review without raising questions he could not answer and did not want to answer in a formal document. So the prints stayed in the field notebook, which was his father's personal property and not a district record, and when his father died, the notebook came to him, along with the rest of the personal effects, and he read through it and found the entry for that Wednesday in October, and it matched the story exactly, detail for detail, the way his father had always told it. The son has the notebook. He has the entry. He has been telling this story for several years now, to people he thinks should hear it, and it is always the same because the notebook is always the same and his father was always the same. And some things, he says, do not change in the telling because they were fixed at the moment they happened, and nothing afterward moved them. He says his father never walked a trail alone after 4 p.m. again. Not once in the remaining 20 years of his career. He adjusted his shift patterns, he partnered with other rangers, he found reasons to be off the trail by mid-afternoon when he could not arrange a partner. He never explained this to his supervisors in direct terms. He said he preferred morning shifts. That was accepted without question because rangers develop preferences, and morning shifts are not hard to fill. 20 years. His father understood exactly what had been behind him on that trail, walking in his direction, in his footprints, close enough to erase them as it came. He did not have a name for it. He did not try to give it one. He just stopped going out alone in the fading light. And he did it for 20 years without wavering. And his son says that consistency, not the story itself, but the discipline that followed it, is the thing that stays with him. Because his father was not a fearful man, he was a careful one. And for 20 years he was careful about exactly one thing, in exactly one specific way, without ever needing to be reminded. The jacket ended up in the station's donation pile. From there it went to a local outfitter exchange, or a church collection, or some other secondary destination that nobody tracked. It was a ranger jacket, his district, his size, his patch, with no name tag. The son does not know where it is now. He says he hopes it stayed in the county. He says he does not know why he hopes that. It just seems better than the alternative, which is that it is somewhere else, on a trail marker somewhere, hung on the upper arm of a post the way you hang something on a hook, waiting for someone to recognize the patch and think it is theirs. The account that follows is the shortest in this collection in terms of elapsed time. Everything that mattered happened within a single patrol shift, a few hours on a gravel road in the late October. But it was submitted with a specificity and a plainness that made it hard to set aside. The ranger who sent it included a single line of the context. This happened to me last fall. I am still employed. I am not saying where. I am saying what I saw. She has not submitted her name. She has not followed up. The photographs she described are filed somewhere in a district patrol log under a notation that received no follow-up response. She says the strangest part is not what she saw. It is that nobody at her station seemed particularly surprised when she described it. She knew the road the way you know, something you have driven dozens of times on the same shift pattern. Not consciously, not with active attention, but in the body, the way your hands adjust for a curve before your eyes register it. The patrol loop was 11 miles of gravel forest road that crossed into a closed fire management area at the 4-mile mark and ran through it for about 3 miles before coming back out the other side and looping back to the district boundary. She had driven it on night shift more times than she had counted. Nothing had ever happened on it. That was normal. Most patrol loops are like that. The same road, the same dark, the same nothing. Shift after shift. And you develop a relationship with the nothing that is almost comfortable. It was late October, a Tuesday, approximately 2 in the morning. The temperature had dropped through the evening, and the road surface had a light frost on it, the kind that shows in headlights as a faint silver sheen on the gravel. She was driving slowly, headlights on low for wildlife, windows cracked 2 inches for air despite the cold, because she had learned early in her career that a slightly cold cab kept her sharper on night shifts than a warm one. Her thermos was in the cup holder, the coffee in it already past its best, but still drinkable. Her radio was on low volume, the static and occasional dispatch traffic a background presence she had learned to monitor without actively listening. Her patrol log was on the passenger seat, open to that night's entry, a pen clipped to the top of the page. She was passing through the fire management section, the dark part of the loop where the road runs between dense timber on both sides with no shoulder and deep drainage ditches cut into the road edge by erosion matting, when she saw the figure. Center of the road, upright, facing the truck. Standing the way a person stands when they have been standing still for a while and have no immediate intention of moving. Weight settled, not tense, not reactive. She registered it as a person before she registered any specific detail, the way the brain processes upright bipedal shapes differently from everything else in a headlight beam. She hit the spotlight. The road was empty. The elapsed time between seeing the figure and activating the spotlight was under 2 seconds. She knew the road. There was nowhere to step quickly off it. The drainage ditches on both sides were deep, steep-sided, reinforced with erosion matting. Not the kind of obstacle you step across in the dark in under 2 seconds. She sat in the truck with the spotlight on the empty road and the empty ditches and the tree line on both sides, and did the math that did not work, and then got out. The frost on the road surface was light but consistent, the kind that holds an impression clearly. She walked to the center of the road where the figure had been standing and looked at the surface. The impressions were there. Bare footprints, adult-sized, coming from the tree line on the left side of the road, crossing the ditch, which was possible, she noted, if you knew where to step, and proceeding to the center of the road. She followed them with her flashlight. They stopped 6 feet from the current position of her truck's front bumper, 6 feet from where she had been sitting when she saw the figure, facing the truck. There was no return path. The prints came from the tree line, crossed to the center of the road, stopped 6 feet from her truck, and ended. Whatever had made them had not walked back. It had arrived, and it had not left by any path that left a mark on the frost. She stood outside her truck in the 29-degree air and looked at the prints and understood several things simultaneously. The first was that someone barefoot in late October in 29-degree temperatures, crossing through a drainage ditch and walking on frosted gravel, was either in serious medical distress or was not experiencing the cold the way she was experiencing it through her insulated patrol boots. She could feel the cold through the boot leather and the wool sock and the insole. She could not imagine what the gravel felt like on bare skin at that temperature. She did not want to imagine it. The second thing she understood was that whatever had made the prints had walked directly toward her truck and stopped at a distance that put it 6 feet from her door, and had done so without making any sound that she had heard through the cracked window. No footsteps on gravel. No sound from the drainage ditch crossing. No sound at all. She had been monitoring the road with the attentiveness that 2 a.m. patrol work produces after years of practice, and she had heard nothing until she saw it standing there. The third thing she understood was that she was standing outside her truck on a road with no shoulder and dense timber on both sides, and she needed to get back in the vehicle. She photographed the prints before she got back in. Crouched in the frost with her phone out, taking 4 shots from different angles, the flashlight in her offhand angled to show the impression depth. The prints were clear. The toes were distinct, the arch evident, the heel impression showing the slight asymmetry that individual feet produce. They were human prints. They were barefoot prints. They ended 6 feet from her door with no return path. She got in the truck. She locked the doors, which she did not usually do on patrol because it was a truck on a forest road, and she had never felt the need. She locked them now. She put the truck in drive and continued the patrol loop because stopping felt worse than moving and turning around was not possible on that section of road. Without a multi-point turn, she did not want to perform while watching her mirrors for something that had appeared in under 2 seconds and disappeared in the same time. The back stretch of the loop was 2 miles of road running parallel to a dense stand of timber before it curved back toward the district boundary and the return to normal road. She was halfway through the back stretch when her headlights caught movement at the tree line on the right side. Not a deer. Not the way deer move, the particular quality of their motion, the specific relationship between their legs and their bodies. This was upright. It was moving with the truck. Not running, pacing, the word she used in her submission. The sustained parallel movement of something keeping deliberate pace with a vehicle moving at approximately 15 miles an hour through dense timber at 2 in the morning. It kept pace for what she estimated as 40 yards. She did not stop. She did not use the spotlight. She looked at it in her peripheral vision rather than directly because looking directly would have required turning her head, and she did not want to turn her head. It was at the tree line, partially occluded by the timber, and she could see enough to confirm upright, enough to confirm sustained parallel movement, not enough to confirm anything else. At the next curve, the road turned left, and the timber on the right side ran straight, and whatever had been pacing her reached the limit of the curve's sight line and was gone. She drove the rest of the loop without stopping. She did not slow for the wildlife check she usually did at 2 locations on the back stretch. She drove at a consistent speed and watched the road and reached the district boundary and kept driving until the gravel turned to pavement, and the pavement put 2 miles between her and the loop before she pulled over and sat for a moment with the engine running. She filed the photographs in her patrol log with the notation, possible trespasser, barefoot, evidence of presence near vehicle. She described the figure in the road and the parallel movement at the tree line. The official response, received 3 days later through her supervisor, was no follow-up required, no reported incident. 4 words and 2 fragments that together meant the institution had looked at what she submitted and decided it did not require a category. She went back in daylight with another ranger the following afternoon. The frost was long gone, the road surface dry and ordinary in the flat October light. No prints, no evidence of anything having crossed the ditch or stood in the road or moved through the timber. She showed her patrol partner the photographs on her phone, standing on the road in the place where she had stood the previous night. He looked at them carefully, longer than she expected, turning the phone to see the angle of the prints relative to the truck's position. He asked one question. How far did it walk toward the truck? 6 feet, she said. He handed the phone back and looked at the tree line on the right side of the road for a moment. He did not say anything else. She had worked with him for 3 years, and she knew when he was choosing not to say something versus when he had nothing to say, and this was the former. He had something to say and he was not saying it, and she did not push because whatever it was, she was not certain she wanted it said out loud on that road in that light. She rolls her windows up on night patrols now, all the way up, every time, regardless of temperature. She noticed she was doing it before she consciously decided to do it. It started the night after the incident and has not stopped. She does not explain it when other rangers ride with her and notice the closed windows on warm nights. She just drives with the windows up and the heat on and her eyes on the road and the tree line both. The photographs are in the patrol log. The notation is there. The follow-up response is there. Nobody has requested the photographs since she filed them. She says the strangest part, the part that she keeps returning to, is not what she saw on the road or at the tree line. It is what her patrol partner did not say. It is what her supervisor did not ask about. It is that when she described the barefoot prints in frost to 2 different people who had worked that district longer than she had, neither of them looked surprised. Not unsettled, not skeptical, not curious, just steady. The way people look when they are hearing something they already know. She does not know what they know. She has not asked. She is not sure that asking would get her an answer, and she is not sure she would find the answer more reassuring than the silence. The final account in this collection is the longest, and the one the person who submitted it most clearly needed to tell. It was passed along through a former colleague of the woman involved, with her permission and at her request. She moved away the spring after the events described here concluded. She has been at a different district since, indoor assignments, no backcountry work. She still does not want her name attached to the account. Her former colleague says she is doing well, which he offers without elaboration. and then says she asked him to make sure the story was told completely, because she spent 17 years at that station and she is tired of being the only person who knows the full shape of it. She had been district supervisor for 9 years when the first call came in, which meant she had been there long enough to know the station's rhythms the way you know a place you have administered rather than just worked. Not through the soles of your boots, but through the paperwork, the equipment logs, the incident reports, the staffing patterns, the particular way problems presented themselves in that district versus others she had worked before. She was not a field ranger by that point. She was management, which meant her relationship with the land was mediated through documents and the accounts of the people who walked it. And she was good at her job, which meant she took those documents seriously. The call came through on the night shift, which meant she was not at the station when it happened. She reviewed the log the following morning as part of her standard review of overnight activity. The night shift ranger had noted an incoming transmission at 3:17 a.m. on the district radio frequency. Origin unknown, content unclear, logged as possible equipment artifact and flagged for follow-up. She read it, noted it, forwarded it to the equipment coordinator for a routine check and moved on. The equipment check came back clean. She filed the follow-up and closed the item. 6 weeks later, it happened again. Same time. 3:17 a.m. Same frequency. The night shift ranger that evening was a different person, and his log description matched the first. Incoming transmission. Origin unknown. Content unclear. She noted the repetition. 2 instances of the same anomaly at the same time on the same frequency, 6 weeks apart. She ordered a more thorough equipment diagnostic. The diagnostic found nothing. She had the frequency checked for interference sources. Nothing. She filed the results and kept the item open in her tracking log because 2 instances of an unexplained anomaly at the same time felt like a pattern worth monitoring, even if she could not yet say what kind of pattern. It happened 3 more times over the next 14 months, irregular spacing, and each time the log description was the same. Transmission at 3:17 a.m., origin unknown, content unclear. She interviewed each receiving ranger personally. She asked them to describe the content as precisely as they could. They all used the same kind of language. Static, partial voice, unclear, could not make out specific words. She ordered the equipment team to install a transmission logger on the district frequency channel. The logger ran for 8 months. It captured 2 of the anomalous transmissions in that period. When she reviewed the recordings, they were consistent with the ranger's descriptions. Static. Something that might have been a voice underneath it. Nothing that resolved into identifiable words or phrases. Then it went annual. Same date, same time. 3 consecutive years in a row. She noted in her tracking log that the date corresponded to the anniversary of the landslide, which she had known about since before she took the district assignment. The slide had happened 12 years before her arrival, a significant event in the district's history. Multiple fatalities on a trail that had subsequently been closed, gated, and had its trailhead physically removed. The trail existed on old maps and in the district's historical records and nowhere else. Its designation number had been retired from the active system. The physical trail was there, somewhere under 12 years of forest succession, but nobody used it and nothing official pointed toward it anymore. She noted the date correspondence in her tracking log and kept it to herself, because noting a correspondence between an unexplained radio anomaly and the anniversary of a fatal landslide was not the kind of observation that belonged in a formal document without considerably more to support it. She kept the item open. She kept reviewing the logs. She waited to see what the pattern did next. The content changed in year 2 of the annual cycle, which was approximately 3 years into her active monitoring of the anomaly. The night shift ranger who took the call that year was a woman who had been with the district for 4 years and had a reputation among her colleagues for precise and thorough logging. Her incident note on the 3:17 a.m. transmission was 3 paragraphs, which was unusual. She described a voice, female, older, calm, transmission quality poor, but intelligible enough to identify the content as a trail condition report. Creek level at the lower ford, she had written. Blowdown noted at the upper switchback junction. Trail surface description, north face, frost coverage significant. She had written the specific details the voice had given, each one, in order, the way she always wrote things, completely in sequence, without editorializing. The supervisor read that log note 3 times at her desk the morning after. A trail condition report. For a trail that had been closed for 12 years. Specific conditions, internally consistent, described by a voice that sounded like someone doing their job. She pulled the tracking log, looked at the history of the anomaly, and understood that the pattern had moved from static into content, and that the content was specific, and that specific content from an unknown origin on a retired trail designation number was a different category of problem from atmospheric interference. She went to find the oldest employee at the station. The logistics coordinator had been with the district longer than anyone else currently on staff, longer than the supervisor herself, long enough that she had been there during the years immediately following the landslide. She had the particular quality of long-tenure station employees, competent, quiet, unbothered by the things that bothered newer people, in possession of institutional memory that lived in her head rather than in any document. The supervisor found her in the supply room doing inventory and asked her, as casually as she could manage, whether she had ever heard of any issues with the district radio frequency producing anomalous transmissions. The logistics coordinator looked up from her clipboard. She said, "The trail reports itself." She said it the way she might say the road floods in March or the generator runs rough when it's cold. A practical observation about a known characteristic of the environment, not offered as something strange. Offered as something the supervisor should probably already know. The supervisor asked what she meant. The logistics coordinator set her clipboard on the shelf beside her. She said it had always done that, as far as she knew, since before her time at the station and certainly since the slide. She said some of the old rangers used to joke about it, that the trail didn't know it was closed. She said they had stopped joking about it after a while. She did not say when they had stopped or what had made them stop. She picked up her clipboard again, which the supervisor understood to mean the conversation was at whatever end the logistics coordinator had decided it had. She went back to her desk and sat with that for a long time. The trail reports itself. Said plainly, without drama, by a person who had been at that station for a very long time and had apparently made her peace with it in the way that people make peace with the persistent characteristics of the places they work. The road floods in March. The generator runs rough when it's cold. The trail reports itself. She pulled the old designation number from the archived equipment manual, the number that had been retired when the trail was decommissioned. She compared it to the transmission logs. The anomalous transmissions were tagged with that number in the logger data. The retired designation, the one that no longer existed in the active system, the one that a radio would have to specifically know in order to use. She sat with that comparison and understood something she had been circling around for 3 years without quite reaching. Whatever was transmitting had been using the trail's old designation number from the beginning. Not a random frequency bleed, not atmospheric interference generating arbitrary signals, something that knew the number. Something that had known the number since before the active system retired it, which meant it had known the number when the number was current, when the trail was open, when the designation meant something. The trail had been closed for 12 years. Something had been calling in on its number for at least 3 years of documented anomalies, and possibly longer, because the logistics coordinator had said since before the slide, and the earliest logs the supervisor had access to only went back to her tenure. There were older logs, archived, physical documents in storage at the regional office, the kind that predated electronic logging systems. She made a note to request them. Then she closed her tracking log and went home, and she drove carefully on the mountain road and did not turn the radio on, which she noticed she was doing and did not try to explain to herself. In year 3 of the annual cycle, the call did not come once. It came every night for 11 nights in a row. The voice was there immediately, not preceded by the sound of someone taking a breath or settling into a call the way voices usually are when a connection has just been made. It was simply there, mid-sentence, mid-report, as if it had been speaking for some time before she picked up and she had simply joined something already in progress. Creek level at the lower ford, running 2 inches above the seasonal average for this date. Blowdown at the upper switchback junction, obstruction unchanged, approximately 40% of trail width. North face frost coverage significant, clearing anticipated by mid-morning based on current temperature gradient. She sat very still. The voice was calm. It was the specific calm of someone who has done a thing many times and has developed a rhythm for it that does not require conscious effort anymore. The calm of practiced competence. It was female. It was older, not elderly, but the voice of someone who had been doing outdoor work for years. The particular quality that extended time in that kind of work puts into a voice. Measured, unsentimental, observant. She had heard variations of it in the voices of long-tenure rangers and trail volunteers throughout her career. It was a working voice. She did not speak. She did not announce herself or ask who was calling or say the standard station greeting she had said 10,000 times picking up that phone. She held the receiver and she listened, and the report continued. Trail surface on the southern approach, firm and dry. Water crossing at mile marker 3, passable at current levels, no hazard. Wildlife observation. Bear sign noted near the upper clearing. Scat recent. Consistent with current foraging pattern for the season. Hikers should be advised to maintain food protocols on the upper section. She was not writing. She had not reached for her pen or her log. She understood later that she had not done those things because some part of her had recognized that this was not a call she was going to document in the normal way, that the normal ways were not built for this. She sat with the receiver and listened to trail conditions for a trail that did not exist, reported by a voice that should not have been able to call her, and she waited to see what came next. The report ran for approximately 3 minutes. She counted backward from when she picked up, anchored to the time she had noted on the clock before the phone rang. 3 minutes of conditions. Specific, sequential. Delivered in the order the personnel file had described. Creek, blowdown, frost, surface, water crossings, wildlife. The order Margaret had used for years on that trail. The order her supervisor had noted in her commendation as a standard worth preserving. Then the voice paused. Not the pause of static or transmission difficulty. The pause of someone who has finished the prepared portion of what they are saying and is moving to something outside it. A conversational pause. A human pause. The gate at the lower trailhead needs a new chain. The old one is rusted through. She looked toward the window. The station had a service gate visible from her office window, the lower trailhead gate that controlled access to the district service road. The gate she drove through every morning and evening without thinking about it. The parking lot light lit the area near the gate, but not the gate itself clearly, and in the dark and at that distance she could not see the chain well enough to assess it. The line was quiet for a moment after that. Not dead. She could feel the connection still present, the particular quality of an open line. And then it ended. No click, no tone. It simply was and then was not, the way a sound stops. She sat with the receiver in her hand for a moment before setting it down. She looked at the clock. 3:21 a.m. She had been on the call for 4 minutes. She had not activated the recording function of the station phone system, which she had meant to do since the night the calls moved from the radio to her extension, and which she had not done because she had not anticipated that the call would come to her directly rather than to the night shift desk. The recording function had to be manually activated per call. She had not activated it. There was no recording. She looked at the phone for a while after she set the receiver down. The station was quiet around her. The fluorescent light in the hallway ticked. Outside, the parking lot light held the area near the gate in its flat yellow circle. The gate itself at the edge of the light. The chain, a dark line she could not assess from that distance in that light. She went home. She drove carefully on the mountain road, as she had been driving it lately, and she did not turn the radio on. She went to sleep at an hour that was neither late nor early, depending on how you counted, and she slept without difficulty, which surprised her when she thought about it later. She had expected to lie awake. She did not. She slept the way you sleep when something that has been unresolved for a long time has moved, not to resolution, but to a different kind of standing. In the morning, she went to the gate before she went inside. She touched the chain. She did not need to examine it closely. The rust was visible from several feet away, the kind of deep oxidation that develops over years of exposure. The chain surface pitted and flaking. The links stiff in a way that suggested the metal had been compromised through its cross-section rather than just on the surface. She lifted the chain and felt the weight of it, and one of the links shifted in a way that a sound chain does not shift. A slight give in the metal that meant the integrity was gone. She let it down carefully. She called maintenance before her first cup of coffee. The crew came out that afternoon and confirmed the chain needed immediate replacement, which they did on the same visit. The foreman said the chain was overdue, that it had been on his list but had kept getting pushed, that another winter would probably have taken it to the point of failure. He said they were lucky someone had flagged it. She thanked him and did not say who had flagged it. She checked the station phone log for the 3:17 a.m. call. The log showed an incoming call at that time on her extension, duration 4 minutes and 11 seconds. Origin listed as unknown, no number recorded. The station phone system logged all incoming calls automatically, origin number included. Unknown, no number recorded was not a standard log entry. It was the log's notation for a call that had come through without any identifiable origin data, not a blocked number, which logged differently, but a call that the system could not assign a source to at all. She filed the call log with her standard overnight notation and the maintenance request for the chain, which was now complete. She did not add context. She did not note that the call had told her about the chain. She wrote up the factual record, call received, duration, origin unknown, maintenance item identified and resolved, and left it at that, because the factual record was true and complete in the ways that mattered for the files, and left out only the parts she could not account for. She spent the rest of that day working normally. She answered emails. She approved a staffing schedule. She signed the regional office paperwork that the retired ranger had left behind. She did her job. She was good at her job, and she did it. And at 5 in the evening, she drove home on the mountain road without the radio on, and she thought about the trail conditions the voice had reported the previous night. She had checked them. That was the last thing she had done before leaving the station, pulling up the automated sensor data for the district and running the reported conditions against it. Creek level at the lower ford. The sensors showed the creek running above seasonal average, consistent with the report. Blowdown at the upper switchback, she could not verify that directly, but the report was consistent with the blowdown that had been noted in previous years' transmissions and was likely unchanged. Frost on the north face. The temperature sensors on the north-facing ridge section showed overnight temperatures consistent with significant frost coverage, clearing anticipated by mid-morning based on the gradient. Wildlife observation. Bear sign near the upper clearing. She could not verify that either, but the season and the foraging patterns the voice had described were consistent with the district's wildlife data for the period. Everything the voice had reported matched the actual conditions on the decommissioned trail that night. Not approximately, not generally, specifically in the way that specific conditions match when someone has been somewhere and observed them directly. As if someone had walked that trail in the dark and noted the creek and the blowdown and the frost and the bear sign and had called it in the way she had been trained to call it in, because that was the job, and the job did not stop. She drove home and she thought about that. She thought about Margaret, who had known the hollow names that did not appear on post-decommission maps, who had reported conditions in a specific sequence for so many years that her supervisor had written it into a commendation as a standard for others to follow, who had died on that trail 12 years ago when the upper section came down. She thought about what it meant to be very good at your job. She thought about what it might mean to be so good at your job that the job continued past the point where you could reasonably be expected to continue it. She did not have a category for that. She was a practical person, a manager, someone who dealt in documentation and protocols and the realities of running a district with limited resources and competing demands. She did not have a framework that accommodated what she now knew. But she had the chain, which was real and replaced and no longer a hazard. She had the conditions, which matched the sensors. She had 47 logged transmissions that she had not yet fully reviewed, going back further than she had looked, and she was going to look. She was going to look because she was a practical person, and practical people deal with what is in front of them. And what was in front of her was a record that needed to be understood, even if understanding it meant sitting with something she could not explain, even if the explanation she kept arriving at was one she could not put in a report. The trail reports itself, said plainly, without drama, by a person who had worked at that station long enough to make her peace with it. She had not made her peace with it yet. She was not sure she was going to. But she was going to look at the records, all of them, the complete history of whatever this was, because that was what you did when something in your district needed to be understood. She pulled into her driveway and turned off the engine and sat for a moment in the quiet. The mountain was visible from where she parked, the ridgeline dark against the sky. Somewhere on the north face of that ridge, in a hollow that did not appear on current maps, something had noted the foraging pattern of a bear. Somewhere on the upper section of a trail that officially did not exist, the frost was clearing by mid-morning, the same way it had been clearing for 12 years. Observed and reported and logged and ignored. Not anymore. She spent her last week at the station going through the archived radio logs. She had requested the physical records from regional storage 2 months earlier, after the night the phone rang, and they had arrived in 3 banker's boxes that she had stacked in the corner of her office and not opened until she knew she was leaving, until she had made the transfer request and had it approved and had a departure date on the calendar. She did not know why she had waited. She thought it was because opening them felt like the last thing she was going to do there, and she wanted it to be the last thing, in the right order. She opened the first box on Monday of her final week. The records went back 19 years, which was as far as the regional archive held for that station. Paper logs from the years before electronic logging, then printed electronic logs from the transition period, then the standard digital printouts she was familiar with from her own tenure. She started at the beginning and worked forward, which was not the efficient direction if she was looking only for the anomalous transmissions. But she wanted to understand the full shape of the record before she isolated what was in it. The first 9 years were ordinary. Normal district activity, incident logs, equipment records, the routine accumulation of a working station's documentation. She moved through them steadily, making notes, flagging nothing. Then she reached the period 4 months after the landslide. The first notation was brief. Overnight log, night shift, 3:17 a.m. Transmission received on district frequency, origin unknown, content unclear. Possible equipment artifact. No follow-up required. The handwriting was that of a ranger she had never met, who had left the district years before her arrival. The notation was so routine in its language that it would be easy to pass over it, and for 9 years, apparently, people had passed over it without connecting it to anything. She kept going. The notations appeared at irregular intervals through the first years after the slide, sometimes months apart, sometimes closer together, always at 3:17 a.m., always the same language. Unknown origin, content unclear, possible equipment artifact. Nobody had flagged the time. Nobody had flagged the consistency of the origin designation. Nobody had connected one notation to the next because each one had been reviewed and closed in isolation, a minor anomaly resolved by the simplest available explanation and filed away. She understood that. She had done the same thing herself with the first few occurrences during her tenure, before the pattern became impossible to ignore. That was how institutional records worked. Each item reviewed in its own context, closed on its own terms, without the connecting thread that only became visible when you laid everything out in sequence. Nobody had laid everything out in sequence before. Nobody had been looking for a sequence. She found 47 separate notations across 12 years of logs. 12 years, beginning 4 months after the slide, running through to the most recent transmission she had documented herself. 47 3:17 a.m. transmissions on the retired trail designation number, logged by at least 11 different rangers across 2 decades of night shifts, each one noted and closed and filed and not connected to any of the others. In 31 of the 47, the log notation included enough content description to be analytically useful. The earliest entries had little, static, partial voice, unclear content, but as transmission quality apparently improved over the years, the notations became more specific. By the middle period of the record, roughly 6 or 7 years in, rangers were noting creek levels and surface conditions and wildlife observations in enough detail that she could cross-reference them against the weather and observation records that had been kept for the district through the same period. She spent 3 days doing that cross-referencing, working through the data methodically, matching reported conditions to historical records. 31 transmissions, 31 sets of reported trail conditions, spanning 12 years of nights on the 3rd of October, each at 3:17 a.m. She verified every one she could verify. Creek levels against flow gauge records, frost coverage against temperature logs, blowdown status against the maintenance records that had been kept for adjacent trails during periods when the district had done cross-terrain assessments, wildlife observations against the district's seasonal wildlife tracking data. Every verifiable condition was accurate. Not approximately, not within a reasonable margin. Accurate in the specific way that direct observation produces accuracy, the way a person standing in a place and looking at it produces accuracy. The creek had been at the reported level on each date. The frost coverage had been consistent with the reported description. The wildlife sign had been consistent with the species, the season, the behavior pattern described. Something had been on that trail, physically present on it for 12 years. 31 nights of documented conditions, each one accurate. Each one reported in the sequence Margaret had used: creek, blowdown, frost, surface, water crossings, wildlife. Each one transmitted at 3:17 a.m. on a designation number that had been retired from the active system the year after the slide. 47 transmissions total, 31 with enough content to verify, 31 verified accurate. She sat with that number for a long time. 47 times across 12 years, someone or something had checked in from a trail that did not exist. And 47 times the check-in had been logged and closed and filed, and nobody had understood what they were hearing. The logistics coordinator had said the trail had always done that, since before the slide. The physical records only went back 19 years. She could not know how much further back it went. She could only know the shape of what the records showed, which was 12 years of accurate trail reports from a dead trail, delivered by a voice that a retired ranger had identified without hesitation as a woman who had died on that trail when the upper section came down. On Thursday of her final week, she found the recording. She had not known there was a recording. The transmission logger she had installed during her tenure had captured some of the transmissions, but she had reviewed those during her active monitoring, and they were in the digital archive. What she found in the third banker's box was a cassette tape in a small plastic case, labeled in ballpoint pen with a date from 8 years before her arrival, and the notation trail frequency, 317. Keep, the word keep underlined twice. She did not know who had written it. She did not recognize the handwriting. Someone had recorded one of the early transmissions on a personal recorder, apparently, and kept the tape and put it in the district files, and it had traveled through 8 years of record transfers and archive boxes, and arrived in her office in the third banker's box without anyone knowing it was there. She found a cassette player in the equipment room, an old unit used for dictating maintenance reports before the station switched to digital systems, still functional. She brought it to her office and closed the door and played the tape. The quality was poor. The way cassette recordings of radio transmissions were poor, layered static, the voice underneath it partial and compressed. But the content was there. Creek level, blowdown, frost on the north face. The sequence, in order, in the calm, working voice she knew now from her own nights with the phone. 8 years before her arrival, 4 years after the slide, someone had sat in the station at 3:17 a.m. with a personal recorder and captured this, and had written keep on the label and underlined it twice, and had filed it in the district records and had apparently not told anyone. She listened to it twice. Then she sat in her office with the tape player on her desk and looked at the wall and thought about what it meant that someone had known, 8 years before she arrived, and had kept the tape and filed it, and had not explained it to anyone, and had left it for whoever came next to find it, if they looked. She looked. She had spent 12 years not looking and then 3 years looking, and now she was leaving. And the thing she was leaving with was the complete picture of something that had been happening since 4 months after the slide, and was still happening, and would continue to happen after she was gone. Because the trail did not know it was closed, and the trail reported itself, and that was simply a characteristic of the district, the way the road flooded in March, and the generator ran rough in the cold. On Friday, her last day, she updated the tracking log one final time. She entered the results of her archival review: 47 transmissions, 12 years, 31 verified accurate, in the same format she had used throughout, factual and precise, without interpretation. She noted the cassette tape and logged it into the physical evidence record with a location reference so it could be found. She updated the equipment log for the chain replacement, which was already complete. And then she did something she had not done in 17 years at that station, not once. in any log or report or document of any kind. She added a personal notation to an equipment log. One word, below the final entry in the radio transmission tracking log, in her handwriting, with no explanation attached to it because no explanation was adequate, and she had made her peace with that. Margaret. She closed the log. She packed the personal items from her desk into a single box. Not much, after 17 years, because she had never been someone who accumulated things in offices. She carried the box to her truck. She drove down the mountain road for the last time, without the radio on, watching the ridgeline in the rearview mirror until the road curved and took it from view. She has not worked a backcountry assignment since her transfer. She does indoor work now, administrative work, the management of records and schedules and equipment logs, at a station that is larger and flatter and does not have a retired trail designation number appearing in the overnight frequency log at 3:17 a.m. on the 3rd of October. She is good at her job. She has always been good at her job. She does it without needing to be reminded of why it matters. She says she is not afraid of what she heard. That is the thing she wants understood, if anything about this account is understood. She is not afraid of Margaret. She is not afraid of the trail or the hollow or the voice that has been checking in from the north face for 12 years, with accurate frost coverage reports and bear sign observations, and the specific calm of someone who knows their terrain and their protocol, and sees no reason to deviate from either. What she is afraid of is how long it happened before anyone understood what they were hearing. 47 times. 12 years. 11 different rangers logging the same transmission as unknown origin. Possible equipment artifact, no follow-up required. A cassette tape in a banker's box with keep written on it and underlined twice, filed by someone who knew and did not say. A logistics coordinator who had made her peace with it so long ago she mentioned it the way you mentioned the road flooding in March. 17 years at that station. And she had needed to be told by a woman who died in a landslide that the gate chain was rusted through. Not the ghost, the chain. That is what she cannot put down. That is the detail that stays. She had driven through that gate every morning and every evening for 9 years since the chain was installed, and she had not noticed the rust, and the voice had. The voice had been on that trail in the dark, in October, on the north face where the frost was significant and clearing by mid-morning, and it had noted the chain. It had done its job completely, the way it had always done its job. Creek and blowdown and frost and surface and water crossings and wildlife, and then the practical item that needed attention, the gate chain, the thing a person notices when they are paying attention to the infrastructure they are responsible for. She had been responsible for that gate for 9 years. The voice had been responsible for that trail for longer than anyone currently living had worked it, and the voice had noticed, and she had not. The radio log is still at that station. 47 entries, 12 years, each one marked unknown origin, each one accurate, filed under the retired designation number of a trail that has been closed since the slide took out the upper section and 3 people who were working it that day. Below the last entry, in the supervisor's handwriting, one word. The chain is new, the gate works, the trail is still closed. On the 3rd of October at 3:17 in the morning, the district radio frequency receives a transmission on a retired designation number, and whoever is on night shift logs it as unknown origin, content unclear, possible equipment artifact, and marks it no follow-up required. And somewhere on the north face of that ridge, in a hollow with a name that does not appear on any current map, the frost is doing what it does in October, and the creek is at whatever level the recent weather has put it, and the blowdown on the upper switchback is still approximately 40% of the trail width, and someone who was very good at her job is noting all of it carefully, in order the way she always has, because the job does not stop and the trail does not know it is closed. And some things, once learned thoroughly enough, do not require the world's cooperation to continue.